What's up, guys? Welcome to Eclipse Wizardry. We've got something special today. What if Harry's blood sacrifice at age 8 created Unbreakable Veela bond with Fleur and every Delacour witch? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's dive in. Chapter 1, The Ward Stone. The garden at number 4, Privet Drive was not the kind of place where magic happened. It was the kind of place where magic went to die quietly, smothered under pruned hedges and pressure-washed paving stones and the suffocating normalcy that Vernon Dursley cultivated the way other men cultivated roses. Every blade of grass was precisely the same height. Every flower bed was geometrically exact. Even the soil smelled somehow corporate, as though it had been informed of its role and had decided to comply. Harry Potter was 8 years old, and he was bleeding into it. Not dramatically. Not in the way stories describe blood, no arterial spray, no gothic pools catching moonlight. Just a slow, persistent seep from the gash above his left eyebrow, the kind Vernon's rings produced when he caught you at the wrong angle. Harry had learned to catalogue the different types. Belt buckle was worst. Open hand was almost nothing. Rings were somewhere in the middle, they bled more than they hurt, which was almost philosophical if you were 8 and had already developed the habit of finding the philosophical angle on everything because the alternative was crying, and crying never helped. He'd been sent outside for breaking a plate. The plate had slipped because his hands were still shaking from dinner, and his hands had been shaking from dinner because Vernon had spent 45 minutes explaining, in the methodical way he saved for his most thorough lectures, exactly how worthless Harry was. How his parents had been worthless. How the sooner Harry understood that he was a burden the world had never asked for, the better off everyone would be. The plate had slipped. Vernon's ring had connected. And now Harry was in the garden at 10 past midnight, sitting in the flower bed with his back against the fence because the house was locked and he'd given up knocking after the first 10 minutes. It was February. The cold was the earnest, grey-skied cold of an English winter that had already given everything it had and was now just maintaining the damage out of spite. Harry had on a t-shirt 3 sizes too large and a pair of Dudley's cast-off trousers cinched with a piece of twine. No shoes. The soil was wet from yesterday's rain and he could feel the cold working up through his feet and into his ankles, a slow, methodical invasion. He pressed his fingers to his eyebrow and came away with blood that looked black in the moonlight. Right, he said to nobody. He said it the way he said most things, quietly, without inflection, because if you kept your voice flat then people couldn't tell whether you were upset or not, and if they couldn't tell, they couldn't use it. He'd worked that out around age 6. He was quite proud of it. He pulled his knees to his chest and stared at the garden, and that was when he noticed it. There was a stone. Not one of the decorative ones Petunia arranged around the hydrangeas. Not a paving stone or a border stone or any of the sanctioned, purpose-assigned stones in Vernon's approved garden. This was something else, set back against the fence line where the light from the neighbor's security lamp didn't reach, and he was almost certain it hadn't been there yesterday. It was roughly the size of a dinner plate, and it had the color of something very old, the kind of gray-blue that slate gets when it's been underground for centuries. There were markings on it. He could see them even in the dark because, and this was the part that his brain kept sliding off of, they were faintly luminous, like the afterimage you get when you stare at a light bulb too long. Harry sat very still for a moment. Then he got up, because sitting very still had never answered any of his questions and wasn't going to start now. He crossed the garden barefoot, feeling every frost-hardened blade of grass, and crouched down in front of the stone. Up close the markings were more complex than he'd initially processed, layered, overlapping, some kind of script that wasn't any alphabet he recognized, woven through with patterns that his eyes kept trying to interpret as something and then giving up on. It was like a knot that had been tied by someone operating in more dimensions than Harry had access to. The light it gave off was barely light at all. More like the suggestion of warmth. More like the memory of a fire. He reached out to touch it. His blood dripped first. A single drop from his eyebrow, falling in the way blood falls, not dramatically, not mythologically, just the ordinary physics of a liquid that had run out of surface to cling to. It hit the center of the stone exactly, the way things hit the center when no one is trying for it, with the unself-conscious accuracy of accident. The stone drank it. There was no other word for it. The drop didn't spread, didn't pool. It was simply absorbed, the way water disappears into dry earth, and for a fraction of a second every marking on the stone blazed, not the gentle suggestion of warmth glow from before but a genuine, searing white gold, the color of something that had been waiting a very long time and had just been told it could stop. Harry fell backward. Not from pain. Not from any physical force. Something had moved through him, not into him or around him but through, passing through his chest like a hand reaching into a cabinet and rearranging things, and the sensation was so entirely unlike anything he'd ever felt that his body had simply decided to sit down and think about it. He sat in the frost-hardened grass with his palms flat behind him and his heart doing something irregular, and he stared at the stone, which was now dark. Completely dark. Darker, actually, than the surrounding garden, as though it were absorbing the ambient light rather than emitting anything. Then the feeling hit him. Not pain. Not exactly. More like recognition. Like when you hear a song you haven't thought of in years and your throat closes before you can explain why. A pull, deep and chest-anchored, pointing somewhere that wasn't a direction he could name. Somewhere distant and specific simultaneously. And underneath the pull, woven through it, barely distinguishable from his own heartbeat, warmth. The sincere, animal warmth of something alive, something that knew he existed and did not think that was a problem. Harry pressed his hand to his sternum and held it there. "What," he said, very quietly, "was that?" Nobody answered. The garden sat in its precisely maintained silence. Somewhere on the street a car alarm beeped twice and stopped. Harry looked at the stone for a long time. Then he looked at his hand, where the cold had dried the blood into a dark crust across his fingers. Then he looked back at the stone. He made a decision, the way he made most decisions, not with dramatic resolution but with the practical acknowledgement that there was nothing else to do. He covered the stone with the loose soil at the fence line, patting it back into place with careful, methodical strokes. Not because he understood what he'd done. Because some instinct older than thought told him that if Vernon ever saw it, something important would be lost. When he was done he went back to the door and knocked again, and this time Petunia opened it, looked at his face with the specific expression she wore when confronted with evidence of Vernon's excess, not guilt, not sympathy, just the tight, drawn look of a woman calculating consequences, and let him in without a word. Harry cleaned his face at the kitchen sink and went to bed in the cupboard under the stairs. He lay on the thin mattress and pressed his hand to his chest again, feeling for the warmth. It was still there. Faint, distant, like hearing music from another room. But there. Unmistakably, stubbornly there. Something alive at the other end of something he had no name for yet. Something that, as he lay in the dark listening to the pipes settle and the Dursleys sleep, felt enormously, embarrassingly like company. He fell asleep faster than he had in months. 4,216 miles away, in the Château Delacour outside Lyon in the Beaujolais wine country, it was nearly 2 a.m. and Apolline Delacour was already awake. She'd been reading in the sitting room off the master bedroom, a habit her husband Edouard accepted with the philosophical resignation of a man who had been married to a Veela woman for 12 years and understood that some battles were both unwinnable and not worth fighting. Apolline didn't sleep much. Veela women rarely did. They ran hotter than humans in every sense, metabolically, emotionally, magically, and the night hours were often the only time the world was quiet enough for thinking. She had a glass of red wine on the side table, a half-read treatise on ward magic in her lap, and an absolutely ordinary February evening going when every ward on the chateau lit up simultaneously. She was on her feet before the wine glass stopped vibrating. The wards on the Château Delacour were not decorative. They were not the standard household protections that most wizarding families maintained, intruder alerts, anti-apparition fields, the usual. They were old, layered, maintained by every Delacour, which going back 11 generations, reinforced by Veela inheritance magic that operated on principles most modern magical theorists had stopped trying to fully explain. They were, in the parlance of the women who maintained them, serious. They were all screaming at once. Apolline crossed the sitting room in 4 strides and pressed both palms flat against the ward anchor built into the south wall, closing her eyes, reading the information the way you read something written in a language you grew up speaking rather than learned. The wards were screaming because they'd felt something. Something ancient. Something they recognized. Something that had activated a ward stone. Her eyes opened. Murd. She was already moving toward the girls' rooms when Fleur's door burst open. Her eldest daughter was 11 years old, silver-haired and furious in the way that only Fleur could be furious, not disheveled or frightened, despite having just been jerked awake, but incandescent, eyes bright, hands up, the beginnings of Veela fire already curling around her fingers like she was prepared to fight whatever had just done that to her. "Maman," she said, and her voice was strange, thin in a way it wasn't usually. "Something, I know." Apolline caught her daughter's face in both hands and held it, looking. Fleur's eyes were normal, pale grey-blue as always, clear, tracking. Whatever had passed through the wards had passed through her too, had jolted her awake from a dead sleep, but it hadn't hurt her. Apolline released a breath she hadn't fully identified as held. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Fleur said, with the irritation of someone whose mother was being unnecessarily parental. "What was that?" "It felt like someone reached inside my chest and," she stopped. Pressed her own hand to her sternum, in a gesture so identical to what Harry Potter was doing in his cupboard 4,000 miles away that if Apolline had been able to see both simultaneously, she might have sat down. "Maman," Fleur said again, differently this time. "There's something. There's a pull. Somewhere that direction," she pointed vaguely northwest, toward the window, toward the dark hills of the Beaujolais and beyond them, beyond France, across the Channel. "What is that?" From down the hallway came the sound of Gabrielle crying. Not the frightened crying of a child who'd had a nightmare. The bewildered, frustrated crying of a 5-year-old who has just had a profound metaphysical experience and has no framework for it whatsoever and is furious about the situation. Apolline went to her younger daughter and picked her up, settling Gabrielle against her shoulder, feeling the small body shaking with the aftermath of something too large for it. Gabrielle buried her face in Apolline's neck and made a sound that was half sob and half something else, something questioning, like she was asking a question she didn't have language for yet. "Chérie," Apolline murmured. "Je suis là. Tout va bien." "Something woke me," Gabrielle announced against her mother's neck, with the particular indignation of a 5-year-old whose sleep is sacred. "Something warm." Apolline stroked her daughter's hair and looked at Fleur over Gabrielle's head, and the look they exchanged was not the look of a mother and daughter. It was the look of two people who were both trying to process something they didn't fully understand, which was uncomfortable for both of them because understanding things was rather central to how both of them operated. "Come," Apolline said. She carried Gabrielle to the sitting room and settled on the long sofa and reached for the ward record, a leather-bound register that the Delacour women had maintained for 240 years, filled with every anomaly, every activation, every unexplained resonance the chateau's wards had ever flagged. She could feel Fleur sitting close beside her, radiating curiosity and the particular tension of someone trying very hard not to appear affected by something that had affected them considerably. Apolline opened the ward record to the most recent page and began writing. February 14, 1988. 1:47 local time. Full ward activation, all anchor points simultaneously. Source, external. Ward stone activation confirmed. Blood offering. Signature analysis, human, significant ambient sacrificial protection layered through bloodline. Powerful. Unknown subject. Bond class, primary, soul tier. She stopped writing. Stared at those last 4 words. Primary, soul tier. She had not written those words in this register. She had not expected to write them in this register. Those words had last been written in a Delacour ward record in 1741, by her ancestor Marguerite Delacour, in connection with an event that Apolline had always read as historical record with the comfortable detachment of someone certain it would never be relevant to her lifetime. She was no longer comfortable. "Maman," Fleur said carefully, reading her face. "What does that mean?" Apolline closed the register. "It means," she said, measuring each word, "that something has happened tonight that I need to understand before I explain. And that I will explain once I do." She looked at her eldest daughter with the direct, level look that Fleur would eventually inherit completely. "What you're feeling, the pull, the warmth, does it frighten you?" Fleur's chin came up. "No." "Good. Don't let it. It's not danger." She paused. "It is, however, consequential. I will need to make some inquiries." "What kind of inquiries?" "The kind that take time." Apolline kissed Fleur's forehead before Fleur could object to being kissed on the forehead, which she did at 11 as a matter of principle. "In the morning, we will talk. Tonight, sleep if you can." Fleur went to bed, though Apolline doubted she slept much. Apolline did not go to bed at all. She sat in the sitting room with the fire burning low and Gabrielle warm and finally sleeping in her arms, and she reached carefully along the bond, the new thing, the thing that had appeared in her chest as certainly as a new room appearing in a familiar house, and she felt for it with the careful, methodical attention she brought to things she needed to understand. It was small at this distance. Faint. But consistent, and certain, and carrying with it the specific quality of something that had already decided to be permanent. She felt, at the other end of it, a child. Alone, and cold, and recently hurt. But falling asleep with something she was not entirely sure he recognized as hope. Apolline held Gabrielle closer and looked into the fire for a very long time. "Ka-tu," she whispered. "Who are you?" The fire didn't answer. But the bond, that stubborn, presumptuous, ancient thing, pulsed once in her chest like a second heartbeat. 6 years passed. Not quietly. They never do. Harry Potter grew up in increments that the Dursleys did not notice and could not have accounted for even if they had. He grew 2 inches the summer he was 9 and ate the extra food he'd started quietly securing, a system of small, undetectable thefts from the kitchen, never enough to be noticed, always enough to supplement the meals Petunia provided in the irregular, grudging way she provided most things. He read everything he could reach. School library, public library, a box of old paperbacks Mrs. Fig left on her doorstep each summer with the careless generosity of a woman who had too many books and didn't think deeply about where they went. He read with the focused hunger of a person who has worked out that knowledge is the only resource that can't be taken away once you have it, and by age 11 he had accumulated the kind of eclectic, self-assembled education that formal schooling would have flattened if he'd been paying attention to formal schooling, which mostly he wasn't. The bond remained. He didn't have a name for it. He called it, privately, the warmth, which was how it had announced itself and which seemed accurate enough. It lived in his chest, a low, persistent presence that he'd long since stopped finding strange and had started treating the way you treat a reliable piece of furniture, useful, present, not something you examine closely once you've established it's not going anywhere. He could feel 3 distinct threads of it. The larger one that he associated, in some wordless way, with someone older, watchful, precise. The second one, warm and sharp and frequently irritated by something. The third, that one had started very small and was growing, gradually, as things do when they're young and have a lot of growing left. He didn't tell anyone about it. This was not a difficult decision. There was nobody to tell. What he did notice, increasingly, was what happened when negative emotions ran in the direction of those threads. When Vernon was particularly awful. When the loneliness got past his defenses at night. When something went badly enough that even his carefully constructed emotional neutrality cracked. Each time, there'd be a resonance from the warmth, a kind of pulse, a stirring, like someone in a far room lifting their head at a sound. It never felt like pity. It felt more like attention. Like being noticed by something that didn't find what it noticed objectionable. By 11, when the Hogwarts letters started arriving and everything about his life accelerated into the particular chaos that would define the next several years, Harry had developed a relationship with the warmth that he'd never have been able to explain to anyone. It was his anchor. Not a crutch. Not a comfort exactly. Just a reminder, steady and unglamorous, that he existed in some context larger than a cupboard under the stairs. Hogwarts was a revelation in the specific, complicated way that things are revelations when you've already independently developed most of the theories they're supposed to reveal. Harry had read enough, including a very battered copy of Hogwarts, a history from Mrs. Figg's doorstep boxes, that the magic itself was less surprising than the social ecosystem around it. He had not anticipated the class structure. He had not anticipated the specific, reflexive contempt with which students like Draco Malfoy related to the concept of him. He had not anticipated the way fame worked when you hadn't done anything to earn it and didn't want it. He adapted, the way he adapted to everything, quietly, quickly, and without wasting much time on feelings about it. He made friends with Ron Weasley on the train because Ron was genuine and straightforward and ate his food with the cheerful, uncomplicated appetite of someone who had always had enough of it, and something about that uncomplicated quality was deeply relaxing after years of the Dursleys. He made friends with Hermione Granger because she was aggressively, sometimes exhaustingly intelligent, and she argued with him as though she thought he was worth arguing with, which was a form of respect he valued. He dealt with Quirrell and Voldemort at the end of first year with the combination of luck, friends, and sheer bloody-mindedness that would become something of a signature approach. He dealt with the Basilisk in second year similarly. He dealt with the Dementors in third year, and it was during third year, the cold of a Patronus lesson in Lupin's office, that he first consciously understood something about the warmth. Lupin had asked him to think of his happiest memory. Harry had thought. Had genuinely tried. Broomstick flying came up, the first time he'd done it in his first flying lesson, the pure animal joy of height and speed. That was real. He held it in his mind and produced a respectable Patronus, and Lupin praised him and Harry accepted the praise with his usual composure. But the memory that had actually come first, before he'd pushed it aside as inappropriate, the one that had surfaced before his conscious mind got involved, was not flying. It was simpler and stranger than that. It was the memory of a February night in a frozen garden, lying on a thin mattress afterward in the dark, with his hand on his chest and something warm answering back. He hadn't used it. It felt too private, too inexplicable, too much his own particular thing to deploy as fuel for a magical exercise in front of even someone as decent as Remus Lupin. But he'd noted it. And in the summer between third and fourth year, sitting in the Weasleys' garden and watching gnomes being degnomed with the detached interest of someone who finds other people's household problems remarkably soothing, Harry had let himself think about it properly for the first time. He was 14. The warmth was still there, 3 threads, still consistent, the large one and the sharp one and the growing one. They felt different now than they had at 8. Richer, more distinct, the way you learn to distinguish individual instruments in a piece of music the more times you hear it. The sharp, warm, frequently irritated one had a quality he associated with intelligence, quick and precise, like the turn of a well-made blade. The growing one was increasingly bright. He wondered, not for the first time, who they were. He wondered if they wondered the same thing about him. He pressed his fingers to his sternum, sitting in the Weasley garden with gnome throwing sounds in the background, and thought, hello, not aloud, not as a genuine magical action, just as a thought in the direction of the warmth. The sharp thread pulsed once, clear and deliberate. Harry stared at nothing for a moment. Then he said, very quietly, and went back to watching the gnomes. The Hogwarts Express in September was the same controlled chaos it always was. Harry, Ron, and Hermione found a compartment, Hermione immediately produced a book that was technically already ahead of the first-year curriculum, and Ron immediately started a chess game against himself because Harry refused to play him anymore after losing 17 consecutive times and deciding that there were better uses of his dignity. The Triwizard Tournament announcement came from Dumbledore at the start of Term Feast. The excitement was immediate and enormous, and Harry felt the familiar sensation of being the last person in a room to understand what something meant. The details emerged over the following week as Hermione, in her role as primary intelligence gatherer, assembled the picture: 3 magical schools, 1 champion each, dangerous tasks, eternal glory, 1,000 galleons, and the general implication that participants were expected to demonstrate the best of their respective magical traditions. Bows, batons and Durmstrang, Ron announced at breakfast 2 weeks into term, reading the morning paper with the focused intensity he reserved for things that weren't schoolwork. Students and faculty coming to stay for the whole year. Bows, batons is the French school. Hermione, have you read about them? Founded in 1284, Hermione said without looking up from Hogwarts, a history, which she was reading for what Harry estimated was the 4th time. Significantly different magical emphasis from Hogwarts, more theoretical, more focused on the formal properties of spell work. Their champion selection process is reputedly quite rigorous. Harry ate his eggs and felt the sharp thread in his chest do something it didn't usually do. It was hard to characterize. It had been there as long as he could remember, the warm, quick, blade-turn quality of it, present and distant simultaneously. But since the beginning of September it had been different. Closer. Slightly louder, the way ambient noise gets slightly louder when its source is approaching. Moving toward him. He'd noticed the change around the time school started and had categorized it as interesting and then deliberately not thought about it too hard, because he'd learned young that overthinking the warmth produced anxiety, and the warmth was not an anxious thing and deserved better than that. But sitting at breakfast with Ron's voice filling in the background and Hermione turning pages and the sharp thread suddenly present in a way it hadn't been, Harry found himself setting down his fork and looking out across the great hall with a specific, uncanny certainty. Someone was coming. Someone attached to that thread was coming here, to Hogwarts, and the bond, the warmth, was reacting to the proximity like a compass needle responding to a magnet. He picked his fork back up. Harry? Hermione had looked up. She had a very particular look she deployed when she thought he was being odd in a way that concerned her. He was receiving it currently. Fine, he said. When do they arrive? The 30th of October. Why? Just asking. She watched him for another moment with the look, then returned to her book. Ron had moved on to Quidditch coverage. Harry went back to his eggs. Whoever you are, he thought in the direction of the sharp thread, which was closer now than it had ever been in 6 years, I hope you're not going to be difficult about this. The thread pulsed with something that felt, despite the distance and the improbability and the fact that he was anthropomorphizing a metaphysical sensation, distinctly like amusement. He almost laughed. The 30th of October arrived with the theatrical timing of a holiday that knows what it is. The sky above Hogwarts had gone the particular shade of deep autumn orange that only happens in Scotland, and the Black Lake was flat and mirror-dark in the last of the light, and the whole school had crowded the grounds because Dumbledore had indicated that the arrivals would be worth watching, which from Dumbledore was a significant endorsement. Harry stood near the back of the Gryffindor group with his hands in his pockets, watching the sky, and felt the sharp thread burning in his chest like a coal. Close. So close now that the distinction between near and far had collapsed entirely. Not a distant signal anymore. Present. Here. He was still staring at the sky when Ron grabbed his arm and pointed at the lake. The Durmstrang ship broke the surface first, a massive dark vessel rising from the Black Lake like something the water had been holding in reserve. There were exclamations, gasps, the general crowd noise of people witnessing something impressive. Harry registered it peripherally. Then someone said, "Look, there," and every head turned toward the sky. The Beauxbatons carriage was enormous. This was the first thing you could say about it, enormous. Pale blue, drawn by 12 winged horses that moved with the specific, unhurried grace of things that have never had to prove themselves to anyone. It descended in a long, sweeping arc toward the Hogwarts grounds, and as it drew closer Harry could see the windows blazing gold with interior warmth, the Beauxbatons crest on the door, the horse's breath steaming in the October cold. He was aware that his heart was doing something slightly irregular. He pressed his hand to his sternum without thinking, the old gesture, the one from the garden at age 8, and felt the warmth respond, not just the sharp thread but all of it, all 3 threads suddenly awake and close and certain, a chorus where there had been individual notes. The carriage touched down. The door opened. The students emerged first, a stream of pale blue robes, most of them tall and elegant in the way that French lycée students were always described in the books Harry had read, with a self-possessed quality that wasn't arrogance exactly but was adjacent to it. Then more students, then the Beauxbatons' headmistress, a woman of truly extraordinary size who descended the carriage steps with the regal certainty of someone who had never once in her life adjusted her behavior for a room. Harry was watching none of this. He was watching the girl who stepped out third from the carriage door and paused at the top of the steps, apparently taking inventory of Hogwarts with the unhurried assessment of someone who hadn't been expecting much and hadn't been proven wrong yet. She was silver-haired. This was the first thing. Silver-white hair in the specific, genuine silver of moonlight, not dyed, not artificial, pulled back from a face that was, and Harry noted this with the detached analytical clarity he applied to things that were significant, more than conventionally beautiful. There was a quality to it that human beauty didn't quite account for. Something in the bone structure, the particular set of the eyes, the way she stood. Like the word beautiful had been coined for other things and was being stretched past its original purpose. She was looking at the castle. Then she was looking at him. He had about 2 seconds warning, the sharp thread surging, suddenly enormous in his chest, recognition or greeting or both at once, before her pale gray eyes found him in the crowd with the unerring accuracy of something that had been looking for 6 years, and Harry had just enough time to form the thought before the full weight of what the warmth actually was landed on him. Not romantic. Not yet. He was 14 and she was, older, 16 maybe, and he was not the kind of person to confuse significance with sentiment without evidence. But profound. Undeniable. Like recognizing your own handwriting on a note you don't remember writing. Her expression when their eyes met was not soft. It was sharp and measuring and, very briefly, surprised, the specific surprise of someone who had expected one thing and found another. Then the surprise closed, replaced by something more guarded, and she looked away, back to the castle, with the deliberate composure of someone who was not going to give anything away in public. Harry realized his hand was still pressed to his chest. He lowered it. Blimey, Ron breathed beside him, not specifically about Harry and Fleur, just about the collective visual effect of the Beauxbatons students, the way most of the boys around them were reacting. Blimey. Harry said nothing. He was still thinking about what had happened when her eyes had found his, not the obvious physical impact, though she was undeniably striking, but the specific quality of the bond in that moment. The recognition in it. The certainty. 6 years of warmth in his chest and he'd just found out it had a face. And she'd been looking for him too. She'd known what she was looking for and she'd found him in 20 seconds flat in a crowd of several hundred students, without help, without hesitation, and then she'd looked away with the deliberate control of someone managing a strong feeling in public. Which meant she knew about this. Which meant she'd always known about this. Which meant someone had told her. Harry stood in the crowd of students watching the delegation's process toward the castle, and he added up those 3 facts quietly and efficiently, the way he added up things that required action, and arrived at a conclusion. Before the tournament began, he needed to have a conversation with a silver-haired French girl who'd apparently been aware of him since he was 8 and hadn't seen fit to write. He was not, particularly, angry about it. But he was going to have quite a few questions. The days between the arrival and the Halloween feast when the champions would be announced were a specific kind of social chaos that Harry found exhausting in the way only large institutions becoming self-consciously competitive can be exhausting. Gryffindor vs Slytherin, Hogwarts vs Beauxbatons vs Durmstrang, fourth year versus everyone else who thought they were old enough to put their names in and were loudly pursuing every possible angle. Harry had one focus. He'd seen Fleur Delacour, he'd learned her name from Hermione, who had assembled a brief dossier on all notable Beauxbaton students within 48 hours of their arrival, because Hermione, twice more since the arrival. Once at breakfast, where she sat with the Beauxbatons group at their own temporarily assigned table, eating with the focused, efficient manner of someone who had evaluated the food and found it serviceable but not inspiring. Once in the corridor outside the library, where she had been walking with two other Beauxbatons girls and had stopped dead for half a second when he rounded the corner before recovering and continuing past him without acknowledgement. He'd let that one go. Public corridor, other people around, no reasonable way to initiate a private conversation about metaphysical bonds without creating a scene. Harry's strong preference was to avoid scenes unless absolutely necessary. He was patient. He'd learned patience in a cupboard under the stairs. The opportunity came on the 28th of October, 2 days before Halloween. Harry had gone to the library after dinner to work on a transfiguration essay, found his usual table occupied, and retreated to a smaller room at the back of the library that most students didn't use because it had no windows and perpetually smelled of very old parchment and the specific damp of a place that had never quite dried out. He was 15 minutes into his essay when the door opened and Fleur Delacour walked in. She saw him. She stopped. Her expression went through something complex and rapid: surprise, recognition, a flash of something that might have been calculation, before settling into a studied neutrality that Harry recognized as a cousin to his own. They looked at each other for a moment. "Right," Harry said, setting down his quill in the way he set things down when he decided a situation. "You know about it." She walked in, set her own bag on the table at the far end from him, sat down. All of this with the careful, controlled movements of someone who had rehearsed being calm about something. "My mother wrote to me," she said. Her English was precise, lightly accented, deployed with the confidence of someone who'd been formally taught and had decided being formally taught was not a disadvantage. "When I was 11. She explained what happened." "What did she say happened?" "A ward stone activated." Fleur met his eyes steadily across the table. She had, he noticed, the habit of direct eye contact that people who are used to being the most significant person in a room develop, not aggressive, just certain. "Beneath your home in England. You bled onto it. Your blood carries a sacrificial protection enchantment that is, apparently, compatible with our ancestral ward magic in ways my mother describes as unprecedented." "And the bond?" "Yes." A pause. "The bond." Harry looked at her. She looked back. There was something bracing about it. She wasn't performing equanimity, she wasn't managing him with politeness or talking around the subject. She was just sitting with it, the same way he was sitting with it, which was the most unexpectedly pleasant thing about her so far. "How much do you know about what it is?" he asked. "Enough to know it's permanent. Enough to know it's," she paused over the word, significant. "Solitaire," my mother said, which is a classification I've since researched rather thoroughly. She said this last part with the faint, dry precision of someone who had spent several years conducting very thorough research on something they were complicated about. It's a bond that normally requires years of deliberate magical cultivation between Veela and their chosen partner. It doesn't happen by accident. It has never happened by accident. You are apparently an exception. "I have a history of those," Harry said. Something shifted very slightly at the corner of her mouth. Not a smile. The structural possibility of one. "Yes. I know about that too. The boy who lived." She said it with the specific flatness of someone who finds the title as reductive as he does. "My mother was thorough." "What's she like, your mother?" The question seemed to catch her slightly off guard, the smallest flicker. Like she'd been prepared for many conversation directions and this wasn't on the list. "Thorough," she said again, and this time there was something warmer in it. And very, very protective. Is she coming here? She is already here, Fleur said, watching his face. She arrived this afternoon with the Beauxbatons support delegation. She wished to evaluate the situation directly. Harry absorbed this. She's been waiting 6 years to look at me. We both have. She said it without embarrassment, as a fact. You are not what I expected. What did you expect? Another pause, longer this time. She seemed to be deciding how honest to be, and deciding in favor of it, which Harry already liked about her. Someone who knew. Someone who had been told and had, I don't know. Prepared. Presented themselves. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. I did not expect someone who had clearly been entirely alone with it. The words were precise and careful and hit somewhere near the center of him. Nobody told me anything, Harry said, not defensively, just accurately. I didn't know what it was. I just knew it was there. I know. She looked down at her hands for a moment, and then back up. I could feel you. When you were, she stopped. Started again. The bond conducts. I didn't fully understand it until my mother explained, but I could feel when something was wrong. When you were in pain or frightened. Not specifically. Just, she pressed her hand to her sternum, the same gesture, the one that apparently transcended language and cultural context and lived in the body itself. Here. Harry looked at that, her hand on her own chest, the same place he'd pressed his hand at 8 years old and 1,000 times since, and felt something shift in him that he wasn't going to examine in a library at 8 p.m. with an essay due in 3 days. I need to talk to your mother, he said. Fleur nodded, already reaching for her bag. Tomorrow morning. Early, before classes. She's staying in the faculty quarters wing. I'll tell her. She stood, and was nearly at the door before Harry said, Fleur. She turned. I'm not afraid of whatever this is, he said. Not bravado. Not performance. Just the simple, declarative fact it was, offered to her the way you offer someone information they might need. I want you to know that. I don't know all of what it means yet, but I'm not afraid of it. She looked at him for a long moment. No, she said, and her voice had something in it that he couldn't quite identify, complicated, layered, like a chord with more notes than you initially caught. I can see that. And then she was gone, and Harry sat alone in the small, parchment-smelling back room of the Hogwarts library, with his Transfiguration essay half-finished and his heart doing something slightly off-rhythm, and thought, very privately, in the way he thought things he wasn't going to examine yet, that 6 years of warmth had just acquired a whole new dimension. He picked up his quill. He finished the essay. It was, objectively, one of the better ones he'd written all year. Chapter 2, The Girl Who Burned Apolline Delacour was sitting at the desk in her faculty quarters when Harry knocked, drinking coffee and reading what appeared to be a densely annotated document that she didn't put away when he entered, just set face down with the unhurried authority of someone who decides what's private and what isn't on their own schedule. She looked at him. He looked back. He registered immediately, not what he'd expected either, though he wasn't sure what he'd expected from the word mother filtered through 6 years of Bond impressions. She was tall, silver-haired like Fleur but with more warmth in the tone, somewhere between silver and gold, with the kind of presence that didn't announce itself loudly but occupied space the way weather occupies space. You felt it before you fully registered the details. She had Fleur's directness in her eyes and something additional that Fleur didn't have yet, patience, maybe. The specific patience of someone who has been proven right often enough to stop being impatient about it. She was also, Harry noted with the clinical detachment of someone assessing a situation rather than a person, performing absolutely no adjustment to make him comfortable. She hadn't smiled. Hadn't offered anything social. She was just looking at him with those steady, warm gold eyes, and the large thread in his chest, the one he associated with watchfulness and precision, was burning like a lit lamp. "Sit down," she said. Her English was impeccable, barely accented. "You want coffee?" It was not a question. "Yes," Harry said, because it wasn't. She poured it from a small French press on the desk, actual coffee, dark and proper, nothing like the weak institutional version the Hogwarts kitchens produced, and slid it across without ceremony. Harry sat in the chair across from her and wrapped both hands around the cup and thought, she already knows what I want before I say it, and she wants me to know that she knows. "You are smaller than I expected," she said. "People say that. They are not saying it correctly." She picked up her own cup. "They mean it as an observation about height. I mean it as an observation about nutrition. You were underfed as a child." The sentence landed with the precision of something aimed. Harry met her eyes and didn't flinch. "I was." "For how long?" "Most of it." He paused. "It's not a current problem." She held his gaze for a moment, and something moved across her face that was not pity. She clearly had too much self-command for pity, but was adjacent to something old and protective and very French. Then she set it aside, neatly, like putting a document in the correct file. "I have been waiting 6 years to have this conversation," she said. "I want you to understand that I have had considerable time to form opinions. I would prefer we dispense with the portion of this meeting where you are cautious and I am diplomatic, and move directly to the portion where we say what is true." Harry took a sip of coffee. "I'd prefer that too." She almost smiled. "Not quite." "Good. Then I will begin." She set her cup down. On the 14th of February, 1988, a ward stone activated beneath the house where you lived. It is a very old stone, pre-Norman, we believe, carried to Britain by Veela, who traveled with the early Frankish settlers and buried as an anchor point for ancestral wards. Our family has maintained records of ward stone locations for 11 generations. We knew it was there. We did not expect it to activate, because ward stone activation requires a blood offering, and the offering must carry sufficient ambient magical resonance to achieve bond quality. "My mother's sacrifice," Harry said. "Yes." Apolline looked at him steadily. "Lily Potter's sacrificial protection embedded in your blood is the single most powerful ambient magical signature I have encountered in 20 years of studying ward magic. It saturates your bloodstream. It makes your blood, magically speaking, extraordinary." She paused. When it contacted the ward stone, it did not simply activate the stone's protective functions. It triggered a primary bond formation. The bond recognized in your blood something the ward stone had been designed to seek, a blood offering made in absolute love, absolute sacrifice, with no reservation. That is the foundational requirement of a Soltyr Veela bond. You fulfilled it without knowing it existed. Harry sat with this for a moment. What does the bond actually do? Several things. Apolline settled back slightly, and he understood that she'd been waiting to explain this properly, had probably arranged this explanation in her head multiple times over 6 years, and was now deploying it with the satisfaction of a teacher whose student has finally asked the right question. At the most basic level, it connects your magical core to the Delacour Veela bloodline. All women carrying the Delacour inheritance felt the bond form, my daughters, myself, and my sister's daughters in Lion, and my mother, who is 73 and wrote me a very surprised letter in the morning. A beat. She described you as impertinent. She means it fondly. I haven't met her. She knows. She found it funny. Apolline continued. At the secondary level, the bond creates a permanent empathic channel. Distance limited in the early stages, which is why what you felt was faint for so long. Now that you and Fleur are in proximity, the channel between you will deepen significantly. She looked at him. You have felt the warmth since 1988. Always. You never told anyone. There was nobody to tell, Harry said, not with self-pity, just with the simple accuracy it was. And it didn't feel like something to be afraid of. Apolline was quiet for a moment that felt deliberate. Then, at the tertiary level, and this is the component that has significant implications for your magical development, the bond connects you to Veela ancestral magic. Not fully. Not immediately. But the connection exists, and it grows as the bond matures. Veela magic is old in ways that modern academic wizardry has largely forgotten. It predates the wand tradition, predates the classification systems your ministry uses. Our fire is the part that gets discussed because it's visible and dramatic, but that's the least of it. What's the most of it? She considered him. The most of it is that Veela magic is transformative. It changes what it touches. Our ancestral fire doesn't only burn, it purifies. It unmakes things that shouldn't exist. When a Veela bond forms at soul tier, it shares this quality with the bonded partner. Not the fire itself. The principle of it. She leaned forward slightly. Your magic, Harry, is already remarkable. I have felt it through the bond for 6 years. You have the most naturally powerful magical signature I have encountered in a child. What the bond adds to that is a quality that I will describe, carefully, as certainty. Veela magic does not doubt itself. It cannot. It knows what it is and it acts accordingly. Over time, that quality will become part of how you practice magic. Harry was quiet for a moment, turning this over. It matched things he'd noticed, the ease with which magic came to him when he wasn't thinking about it too hard, the way it accelerated when he stopped hedging and just acted. The way the bond felt, always, not uncertain, not questioning. Just present and sure. The bond connects me to all the Delacour women, he said. Yes. Including you and Gabrielle. Yes. What does that mean for you? Practically. He watched her face. You didn't choose this either. Apolline looked at him for a long moment, and the look was evaluating something, measuring something, and then she apparently arrived at a conclusion because her expression shifted, not softened exactly, but opened slightly, the way a door opens when the person on the other side decides to stop holding it closed. No, she said. We didn't choose it. But choice is not the only foundation for relationship. My daughters and I did not choose to love each other. The Veela bond with our ancestral magic was not chosen. There are things that simply are, and the question is not whether to accept them but what to make of them. She paused. What I have felt through the bond for 6 years has given me a picture of you. Incomplete. But sufficient to form the preliminary conviction that you are someone of consequence. What I am doing here, this conversation, is completing the picture. And? She picked up her coffee cup again. And I am not disappointed. She said it simply, without performance, with the straightforward delivery of someone who gives compliments rarely enough that they mean something. You are direct. You are not frightened of me, which most people are, and you should be at least somewhat cautious, which you appear to be. You did not come in here prepared to be grateful or managed or impressed. You came to gather information, which is correct. She paused. You are also noticeably undersized, which we will address, and your robes are not fitted properly, which suggests either poverty or indifference, and I suspect it is both. Harry looked down at his robes. Back up at her. This is going to become a thing, isn't it? Taking care of yourself? Yes. It is going to become a thing. She said it with the absolute certainty of a woman who has decided something and is simply informing you of its inevitability. You are bonded to my family. My family does not produce people who are undernourished and wearing badly fitted clothes. This is not negotiable. Despite everything, the 6 years, the ward stone, the implications stacking up like books on an unstable shelf, Harry felt something in his chest that was entirely new and entirely warm, specifically because she hadn't framed it as charity or pity or parental concern for a lost boy. She'd framed it as standards, and somehow that was so much better. What about Fleur? He asked. The bond between her and me, it's different from the bond with you and Gabrielle. Yes. Apolline set her cup down. Primary bond. Soul tier. She and you are the anchor points. Gabrielle and I are secondary, through our bloodline connection to Fleur. She looked at him steadily. The primary bond, between you and my eldest daughter, will deepen with proximity and time. It is not a romantic imperative, the bond does not compel feeling. It creates conditions. What grows in those conditions is determined by the people involved. She doesn't like it, Harry said. Not an accusation. Just an observation. She doesn't like anything she didn't choose, Apolline said, and there was affection in it that was also the specific exasperation of a mother who knows her daughter extremely well. She is 17 and extraordinary and accustomed to being the most significant person in any room. The bond complicates that, because you are also significant, which she has not fully processed yet. A pause. Give her time. And do not attempt to manage her. She despises being managed. I wasn't planning to manage anyone, Harry said. Apolline looked at him with those steady gold eyes. No, she said. I know. That is rather the point. The tournament preparations consumed the castle in the way large events consume institutions, completely, loudly, and at the expense of everything that was supposed to be happening otherwise. Harry submitted to it with the patient detachment he'd developed for all large institutional enthusiasms, went to classes, finished his essays, watched the Goblet of Fire get installed in the entrance hall with Hermione providing context and Ron providing commentary. He didn't put his name in. He was 14. He was also, if he was being entirely honest with himself, not particularly interested in earning the tournament's specific brand of glory. The things he needed to prove, he didn't need a trophy for. Halloween arrived, and with it the feast and the goblet ceremony, and Victor Crumb was announced for Durmstrang and the hall erupted, and Cedric Diggory was announced for Hogwarts and the Hufflepuffs erupted louder, and Fleur Delacour was announced for Beauxbatons and the hall went through a specific, complicated noise that Harry identified as half genuine appreciation and half the particular type of affected breathlessness that Veela presence produces in people who aren't managing it well. He watched Fleur walk forward, composed and silver and entirely unsurprised, and felt the sharp thread in his chest burn bright. Then Dumbledore called a fourth name. Harry Potter. The hall went very, very quiet in the specific way that halls go quiet when something has happened that doesn't make sense. Then Ron made a sound beside him that Harry registered peripherally as he stood up, because the parchment had his name on it and there was nothing to be done but stand up and walk forward. He walked forward. He was aware of the eyes. He'd always been aware of the eyes had been on him since he was 11 and had never fully stopped, the specific, consuming attention of a community that had decided he was a symbol before he was a person. He'd developed a specific way of walking through it that was not performing indifference and not suppressing it either, just moving through it the way you move through weather, present to it but not redirected. He passed Fleur on the way to the door to the side chamber. She was looking at him with her pale gray eyes, and her expression was complicated in a way he'd already learned was not her default setting, something between wariness and something else, something less controlled. He caught her eyes for half a second and the sharp thread surged, and then he was through the door and into the small side chamber with the other three champions. He stood by the fire and felt the other three look at him, Crumb with careful assessment, Cedric with genuine confusion and something like concern, Fleur with the most complex expression in the room. "Did you put your name in?" Cedric asked, not accusingly, just asking. "No," Harry said. "Someone put it in for you," Fleur said. Not a question. Looking at him with that measuring look, the one that looked for the thing behind the thing. "Someone put it in for me," Harry agreed. The door opened. Dumbledore, Karkaroff, Madame Maxime, Bagman, Crouch. The explanations and the objections and the rules of the goblet contract that could not be broken. Harry stood by the fire and listened, and noted the specific, unhappy set of Dumbledore's expression, and felt, for the first time since arriving at Hogwarts, the particular clarity that comes when you understand that the adults in charge are operating with incomplete information. Not maliciously. Just incompletely. He found this more useful than frightening. He was going to compete. The contract bound him. He was going to compete, and he was going to do it on his own terms, and whoever had put his name in the goblet had made a miscalculation, because they'd assumed his participation would create the conditions they wanted, and they didn't know what conditions Harry Potter actually created when you gave him a problem and a deadline. He looked across the fire at Fleur. She was watching him. He raised an eyebrow, just slightly. "We'll talk," and she blinked, once, which was the closest to a nod she was going to give him in a room full of people. The days after the selection were a specific social misery that Harry navigated with the impassive efficiency of someone who had been through worse. Ron's defection, the hurt and the jealousy packaged as suspicion, was painful in the particular way that betrayal by someone you like is painful, sharper than you'd expect from something so ordinary. Harry gave him space without drama. Hermione, to her credit, didn't pick sides, maintaining the careful diplomatic neutrality of someone who loved them both and hated the situation, which Harry appreciated. What he didn't anticipate was Viktor Krum. The Bulgarian seeker appeared beside him one morning on the path around the lake with the specific, deliberate intention of someone who has decided to do a thing and is doing it. He was taller than Harry by 6 inches, built with the particular solidity of someone who'd been taking physical training seriously for years, with a hawkish face and a measured, careful way of speaking English that matched Harry's own relationship with understatement. "I watched your Quidditch matches," Krum said. "Last year's Gryffindor Ravenclaw. You found the snitch while performing a Wronski feint." "Accidentally," Harry said. "There are no accidents in the feint. You chose the correct trajectory." Krum glanced at him sideways. "You are 14. Also an accident." Krum almost smiled. "Not quite. You did not enter this tournament." "No. Someone wants you here. This makes you dangerous to them, because they do not understand you, or they would not have entered you." Krum looked out at the lake. "In my country, we have a phrase. Opasno anis nes stoge opasno. The dangerous thing is not knowing what is dangerous." He paused. "I wanted to say, I don't know what is happening here. But I intend to win fairly or not at all. If someone is using this tournament against you, I have no interest in assisting them." Harry looked at him. "You're warning me." "I'm telling you where I stand." Krum shrugged, a very Eastern European shrug, full of pragmatic philosophy. "We can still be competitors. I am simply not your enemy." "Appreciated," Harry said. They walked in silence for a moment, which was companionable rather than awkward, because both of them were people for whom silence was a comfortable state. "The Delacour girl," Krum said eventually, with the studied casualness of someone who is not being casual. "Fleur," Harry said. "You know her?" "Yes." Krum nodded slowly, and something in his expression was, not disappointed exactly, but recalibrated. The expression of someone who had considered a possibility and is now filing it in a different category. "She does not respond to standard social approaches," he said, which was the most diplomatic way Harry had ever heard anyone acknowledge the specific difficulty of attempting to court someone with Veela ancestry. "Probably because they're standard," Harry said. Krum considered this. Another beat. "You are very 14 years old. I've been told." "It is not an insult." Krum stopped on the path, looking out at the lake where the giant squid had surfaced briefly and submerged again with the bored magnificence of something that has long since ceased being impressed by anything. "The first task, the dragons." Harry's head turned. Krum looked at him calmly. "I am not telling you this. We were not discussing this. But I am a seeker, and seekers notice things." A pause. The handlers were careless on the eastern side of the enclosure. Then he turned and walked back toward the castle, and Harry stood on the path and felt the specific, useful warmth of an unexpected ally. The dragon was a Hungarian horntail, which Harry noted with the detached interest of someone evaluating a problem rather than panicking about it, which was only possible because he'd found out from Hagrid the night before while sneaking through the forest and had spent the night running through options in his systematic, quiet way. He'd told Cedric. He'd thought about it and decided that whoever had entered him intended this tournament to be dangerous, and the best counter to that was to refuse to play the game on those terms. He'd told Cedric, and Cedric had looked at him with the specific expression of someone recalibrating what they thought they knew about Harry Potter. He'd summoned his firebolt and he'd flown. Not cleverly, not methodically, not with the caution of someone managing risk in a controlled way. He'd flown the way he flew when nobody was watching and there were no points at stake, and the only thing between him and the sky was his own decision to be there, fast, committed, with the particular attention to the dragon's movement patterns that came from 6 years of reading animals in the way you read animals when you grew up with none and had to imagine them all. The horntail was genuinely magnificent. He had a moment, banking hard to starboard to avoid a fire stream that scorched the air 3 feet from his left knee, of pure and voluntary admiration for the creature, which was a response he was fairly sure none of the crowd was having and which probably said something about him. He got the egg. Not without cost. There was a gash along his left forearm from a talon that had caught him on the second pass, not deep but bleeding freely, and his ears were ringing from a near-miss fire blast, and he was pretty sure his eyebrows were slightly singed. But he had the egg, and he landed, and the roar of the crowd hit him like a physical force. He was aware of several things simultaneously: the pain from his arm, Madame Pomfrey appearing with her kit, the scores going up, 9s and 8s, the highest of the 4 champions, and the specific, burning surge of the sharp thread in his chest that he interpreted, with the growing fluency he'd developed for reading Bond impressions, as something between relief and fierce, startled pride. He was also aware of Fleur, standing at the competitor's enclosure, looking at him with an expression that was not composed. He met her eyes across the distance while Madame Pomfrey fussed over his arm, and her expression was the most unguarded he'd seen from her yet, not soft, not warm in any conventional sense, but open, like a door briefly unlocked. Like she'd been watching something and it had resolved into a shape she hadn't predicted and she was still processing the shape. Then the crowd surged and Cedric was being congratulated and Ron appeared from somewhere yelling Harry with the specific full-throated enthusiasm of someone whose guilt and relief have fused into a single deafening emotional event, and the moment dissolved. But Harry kept it. The weeks between the first task and the winter holidays passed in a rhythm that Harry found, despite everything, manageable. He patched things up with Ron, who was genuinely sorry in the inarticulate, wholehearted way that Ron was genuine about most things. He went to classes and did the work and turned in essays that Hermione proofread and occasionally returned with comments that were more extensive than his original text, which he accepted with good humor because she meant well and was usually right. He spent time, in the evenings, with Fleur. It had started accidentally, or accidentally enough that he'd been willing to let it play out as if it were accidental. The library. The small back room. He'd come twice more and found her there and they'd worked in parallel silence, and the silence was its own kind of conversation, and gradually the parallel silence became actual conversation, which happened with the organic inevitability of 2 people who are both interested in the same things and have stopped pretending otherwise. He was discovering, furiously intelligent. Not in Hermione's encyclopedic, reference-based way, but in a structural way. She thought about how things worked, what the underlying principles were, and she had no patience for received wisdom that couldn't hold up to examination. She asked questions that started from first principles and followed the logic wherever it went. She'd grown up French in the specific way that French intellectual culture shaped its best products, argumentative, rigorous, with a deep skepticism for things that couldn't justify themselves. She was also, and this surprised him more, funny. Not the elaborate wit of someone performing cleverness, but dry and quick, the specific humor of someone who has noticed the absurdity of most situations and has chosen to note it briefly and without fuss. She made a comment one evening about Flitwick's pronunciation of a charm that made Harry inhale his tea, and she watched him cough with an entirely composed expression and the faintest satisfaction. He liked her. Not romantically, or rather, he had categorized that possibility and put it in a separate file marked later because he was in the middle of a tournament that someone had illegally entered him in and there were more pressing considerations, but genuinely, the way you like someone when you find that the person attached to a significant presence in your life is actually, empirically, a person worth knowing. "Tell me about your family," he said one evening, a Thursday in late November with rain against the castle windows and a charms essay between them. "All of it. The whole Veela history." She looked at him over the top of her book. "That's a fairly large topic. I've been carrying a piece of it in my chest for 6 years and nobody told me anything. I think I'm owed the overview." Something in her expression acknowledged the fairness of this. She set her book down. "Veela are not what the books in this library say we are," she began, with the directness of someone who has clearly had issues with the source material. "The classification as semi-beings, my mother calls it the magical establishment's most enduring insult, and she's not wrong. Veela are not semi-anything. We are a separate evolution of magical humanity that developed in parallel to the wand tradition, not as a subset of it." "The fire," Harry said. "Is the least of it," she agreed, the same words her mother had used, and he wondered if Apolline had said them first or if it was simply a family conviction. Veela ancestral magic is based on, there's no direct English translation. In French we say vérité ardente. Burning truth. The principle that things which are false cannot survive in the presence of Veela fire, not because we destroy them deliberately but because our magic is constitutionally incompatible with sustained falsehood. She paused. This is why Veela are so rarely deceived. It is very difficult to lie to someone in whose presence lies physically struggle to maintain coherence. Harry thought about this. Is that why when I'm around you, or even just following the bond, I find it harder to hedge things? Fleur looked at him sharply. You've noticed that? Since the arrival. I say what I mean more directly. I thought it was just, the situation. Knowing it was significant. It is both, she said slowly. The situation is significant. But also, yes, Veela presence. And for you, specifically, the bond amplifies it. You're more connected to Veela magic than any human who isn't a Veela-descended witch. The vérité ardente principle affects you more strongly than it would affect anyone else. She studied him. Does it bother you? No, Harry said. And then, because the vérité ardente was clearly present, it's actually a relief. I've spent a lot of energy on being strategic about what I say. The corner of her mouth moved. I've noticed. I'm still strategic, he said. I'm just accurate about it. She laughed. A real one, brief and genuine, surprised out of her, and Harry felt the sharp thread in his chest light up like something celebrating, which he was choosing not to examine too closely. The bond, she said, after a moment. My mother said it will deepen. I want to tell you that I have thought carefully about this, and I have stopped being resentful about it, and I want you to know that. He looked at her. Were you? Resentful? Considerably. She said it with the same directness she gave everything. I was 11 when my mother explained it. I did not choose it. I am someone who prefers to choose things. And the idea that some boy in England had, an anchor in my chest that I hadn't consented to, she paused. Yes. I was resentful. What changed? She was quiet for a moment, not the calculating quiet of someone deciding what to reveal but the thinking quiet of someone choosing precision. You did not use it, she said finally. 6 years. You carried something you didn't understand, alone, and you never tried to leverage it, never reached through it deliberately, never. She stopped. I thought someone aware of a Veela bond would try to use the connection. Push at it. When I realized you hadn't, when I reached for it myself and it came back clean, just you, being you, existing at the other end without an agenda. I had no idea what I was doing, Harry said honestly. I know. But the result was the same. She looked at him with something steady in her gray eyes. You were trustworthy before you knew I was watching. That matters more than any amount of deliberate trustworthiness. The rain hit the windows and the library settled into its particular nighttime quiet, and Harry thought about that, trustworthy before you knew I was watching, and felt it settle somewhere in him that didn't get addressed much. The Yule Ball, he said, because the subject was coming regardless and he'd rather address it directly than have it ambush them. Yes, she said, with the air of someone who had been waiting for this. I'm not going to ask you. That's not, it would complicate things we're still figuring out, and I think you should go with whoever you want to go with. She looked at him for a long moment. Most boys in this school have attempted to ask me every day since we arrived. I know. You've been saying no. I have. A pause. I was, waiting to see what you would do. Now you know. Now I know. She tilted her head slightly, which he'd started to recognize as the gesture she made when she was recalibrating something. You're not going to be pulled around by this bond, are you? By what it wants or, by what I am? No, Harry said. That's not how I work. She was quiet for a moment. Good, she said, and the word carried weight he didn't think she'd intended to give it, a door opening slightly further, a lock turning over. Roger Davies is going to ask you again tomorrow, Harry added. Third time. He rehearsed a speech in the Gryffindor common room. I overheard it. Fleur blinked. And the speech is actually fine. He means it. He's not a bad person. Harry shrugged. I thought you'd want the information. She stared at him for a second with an expression that was part disbelief and part something else, something warmer. You are genuinely the strangest boy I have ever met, she said. That tracks, Harry said, and went back to his essay. She said yes to Roger Davies. Harry took Parvati Patil, who was gracious about the late invitation and looked genuinely beautiful and danced enthusiastically, which meant Harry spent the evening being dragged through more traditional dance configurations than he'd planned, but which was, all things considered, a better outcome than standing by the wall feeling philosophical. He saw Fleur 3 times across the hall. Each time the sharp thread burned bright. Each time she was already looking at him. The second week of December, Harry was at the lake. Not for any particular purpose. He'd found early in his Hogwarts years that the lake's edge, particularly the northeastern stretch where most students didn't go, was useful for the kind of thinking that required walking. He had, currently, a significant amount to think about. The egg screamed when opened and made no sense. There was a clue in there somewhere and he hadn't found it yet, and he found this irritating in the specific way that soluble problems are irritating when you haven't found the solution yet. He was 400 yards from the castle, sitting on a rock at the water's edge watching the gray afternoon light on the lake's surface, when he heard the splash. Not the ominous supernatural splash of something in the lake. The immediate, human splash of someone in the water. He was on his feet before he'd consciously processed the decision. Scanning the lake's surface, there. A figure in the water 40 feet out, wearing a Hogwarts uniform, arms moving with the specific panicked inefficiency of someone who was not a strong swimmer and had either fallen in or been pushed. Small, a first year, possibly. Harry pulled his shoes off. He went in. The water was winter lake water, which is a different category of cold from any other water. It hits with the comprehensive, immediate authority of something that intends to take you seriously. Harry came up from the first shock and ignored it, the way he'd been ignoring things that wanted to derail him since he was 8, and swam. He reached the first year. A Hufflepuff girl, 11, terrified, had apparently slipped on the frozen bank and hit the water head first, and got his arm across her chest from behind, the way he'd read in a Muggle first aid book 3 years ago when he'd found one in Mrs. Figg's boxes, and started back. He got her to the shore. She was coughing and shaking and had the specific, a shamed expression of someone who had just been rescued and was processing whether to be grateful or mortified. Harry sat her on the bank and rubbed her hands between his and said practical things about warmth and circulation, and she looked up at him with wet, wide eyes. "You're Harry Potter," she said. "And you're alive," Harry said. "Which is the relevant part. Can you walk?" She could walk. He walked her back to the castle, streaming lake water, both of them thoroughly frozen, and delivered her to Madame Pomfrey with a brief, factual account of events and no drama, and declined medical attention for himself on the grounds that he'd been colder and was fine, and went to change his clothes. He did not particularly think of this as significant. He had no idea that Fleur had watched the entire thing from the eastern bank. She found him in the corridor outside Gryffindor Tower an hour later, dry and changed, heading back to the library, and she fell into step beside him without preamble. "You went into the lake," she said. "There was a student in the water. You didn't use a spell. You could have, there wasn't time to think about it." He glanced at her. "Is this a thing?" She was looking at him with the full focus look, the one that meant she was paying attention to something at multiple levels simultaneously. "You didn't tell anyone." "There was nothing to tell. Pomfrey will keep an eye on the girl." "You didn't." She stopped. Looked away and then back. "Most people who do something like that make sure people know they did it." "I didn't do it for audience," Harry said simply. She was quiet for a few seconds. "No," she said, eventually. "You didn't." She didn't say anything else. But she walked with him to the library, and when they settled at their table she was closer than she'd been before, and when their elbows touched on the table neither of them moved away, and the sharp thread in his chest burned with steady warmth the whole evening, not celebrating or urgent, just, there. Permanent, and certain, and entirely decided. The same way it had been since a February night in 1988, when an 8-year-old boy had bled onto something old in the dark, and 4,000 miles away, a family had woken up and known, without understanding why, that something important had just happened. Chapter 3, What Apolline Knows. The meeting happened on a Wednesday, in a corridor that Harry was fairly sure Apolline had selected deliberately. It was on the 4th floor, the quiet stretch between the abandoned divination classroom and the secondary charms library that most students used only under duress, and when Harry came around the corner at 7 in the morning she was already there, standing with a cup of coffee, looking at a tapestry depicting some medieval French battle with the calm, proprietary interest of someone who recognized faces in the crowd. She was in dark robes, her silver-gold hair up, and she had the look of someone who had been awake for some time and found this unremarkable. "You knew I came this way," Harry said. "Fleur mentioned it." She turned from the tapestry. "Also, I asked the castle." He stopped walking. "You asked the castle. The wards here are not so different from our ancestral ones." She handed him a cup of coffee, she'd brought 2, which told him the entire meeting had been arranged down to the detail of what he drank, which he found more reassuring than intrusive. "Hogwarts is a very old building. Old buildings respond to polite inquiry." She looked at him steadily. "You have worked out that someone entered you in the tournament deliberately." "First week," Harry said. "And you have working theories?" "A few." He leaned against the corridor wall, because there were no chairs and she hadn't brought any, which told him she preferred conversations that didn't encourage people to settle in too comfortably. "Someone wants me in the tournament for reasons that don't have anything to do with the tournament. The contract binding me means I have to compete. The tasks are genuinely dangerous, more dangerous than they're presented as being. The most straightforward reading of that situation is that someone wants me dead in a context that can be written off as an accident." Apolline nodded once, precisely, the way you nod when someone has correctly identified a problem you already knew about. And that someone is connected to Voldemort," Harry said. He watched her face. She didn't flinch at the name, a point in her favor that he'd already registered when she'd used it herself without hesitation in their first meeting. "I've been thinking about who benefits from my death in a way that feels planned." "Elaborate." Someone who can get a name into a goblet of fire with enough magical skill to fool the age-line Dumbledore set, and enough political cover to avoid detection, isn't operating impulsively. They're executing a longer plan. Yes, Apolline said. You know something. She took a sip of her coffee. I know several things. She looked at him with that steady, weight-measured look. I am going to tell you some of them, and I want you to understand that I am not telling you because I think you need protection. I'm telling you because you need accurate information, and there is a significant difference, and I want you to understand which one I'm offering. I understand. Good. She turned back toward the tapestry briefly, as though organizing her thoughts through the medieval battle. Before we came to Britain, I made inquiries. In France we have different relationships with information than the British wizarding establishment maintains. The French ministry is not cleaner, but it is older, and older bureaucracies accumulate different kinds of knowledge. She paused. I spoke with someone in the Department of Magical Genealogy and Ancient Bonds, which is a department the British ministry disbanded in 1962 because they found the subject inconvenient. What did they tell you? That your bond with my family did not go unnoticed by everyone. She looked at him. Ward stone activations are logged. Not always immediately, not always accurately, but the magical signature of a primary bond formation at Soltier is significant enough that several monitoring systems flagged it in 1988. Most agencies ignored the flag because the source was too extraordinary to credit. A ward stone of that class activating through an 8-year-old orphan's blood made no institutional sense. But one person investigated. Harry felt the warmth in his chest and also, alongside it, a specific chill that had nothing to do with the corridor temperature. Lucius Malfoy, he said. Apolline looked at him. He's on multiple ministry boards, Harry continued, thinking aloud. He has access to monitoring data. He investigated in 1988, found something he didn't understand, and has been sitting on it since. He looked at her. What specifically did he find? He found that the Delacour bloodline, a significant French Veela family with extensive ancestral ward connections, had formed a primary Soltier bond with Harry Potter. Specifically. She set down her coffee cup. You need to understand what that means in terms of pureblood political architecture. A Veela bond at Soltier gives the bonded partner access to ancestral Veela magic. Not full access immediately, but the connection is there and it grows. Veela magic is, we discussed this, old. Pre-wand. Pre-classification. The old families understand what it represents in ways the modern ministry pretends not to. Power they can't categorize or control, Harry said. More specifically than that. She turned to face him fully. The pureblood hierarchy is built on the premise that power is inherited through specific, tracked bloodlines. That it can be measured, predicted, managed. Lucius Malfoy has spent 30 years building political structures on that premise. A half-blood boy with no pure-blood ancestry and a Soltier Veela bond represents the complete refutation of that premise. Because it says, power doesn't care about your categories. The most ancient magic available chose this boy regardless of his blood status. Harry was quiet for a moment. He's been afraid of this since 1988, Harry said. Not afraid, precisely. Apolline picked up her cup again. Men like Lucius Malfoy don't experience fear in the simple sense. They experience threat assessment, and they respond to threats methodically, over long periods, with multiple redundant strategies. She paused. He didn't act immediately because you were a child and contained by the Dursleys and producing no active threat. He filed it, monitored it, and waited. When you came to Hogwarts and began demonstrating, as you inevitably were going to, that the power in question was real and not theoretical, the threat assessment changed. So the tournament is, an elegant solution to a problem he's been sitting on for 6 years. Her voice was controlled but there was something underneath it, a low heat that Harry was learning to recognize as what Apolline looked like when she was genuinely angry. If you die in the tournament, you die as a participant who knew the risks. The bond dissolves, not cleanly. There would be significant backlash for my daughters, which suggests he hasn't fully thought through that element or doesn't care. And the political problem he's been managing disappears. Harry thought about Fleur. About the bond backlash if he died, what that would do to her, to Gabrielle, to Apolline. He put that thought somewhere that wasn't accessible during a working conversation because it was too large and too motivating and he needed to think, not react. He's working through someone else, Harry said. He's too careful to have direct involvement. Yes. Crouch Jr., Harry said, because he'd been working that particular puzzle and it had a satisfying internal logic. Barty Crouch Jr. He was convicted as a Death Eater, sentenced to Azkaban, officially died there. Officially. He looked at her. Moody hasn't been moody this year. The real Moody would never have demonstrated the unforgivable curses on students like a man who found it entertaining. The real Moody drinks from his own flask because he's paranoid about poisoning. Whoever is doing it has a copy of the flask but drinks from it at the wrong times. Apolline looked at him with an expression he'd begun to identify as the one she wore when he exceeded her already calibrated expectations. You've been watching him. I watch everyone. He shrugged. It's not hard when most people assume you're not paying attention. What do you need from me? She asked, directly, without the preamble of concern. He'd been thinking about this. Nothing yet. Nothing specific. He met her eyes. I need you to stay. Not just until the tournament ends. I need the Beauxbatons delegation to have reasons to remain in Britain past the natural endpoint of the tournament. She regarded him. You are expecting things to escalate. Significantly. And when they do, I'd rather have, he stopped. Not from reluctance to say it, but from the specific precision required to say it accurately. I'd rather have my family present. The word sat in the corridor between them. Apolline looked at him for a long moment. The gold warmth of the large thread pulsed once in his chest, clear and deliberate. Yes, she said, simply. We will stay. Harry told Hermione about Crouch Jr. Not about the bond, that was a different conversation, one he was still arranging the language for, and Hermione's reaction to that specific information would require a carefully controlled environment and possibly a large amount of time. But he told her about Moody, walking the path around the lake on a bright December morning, explaining his reasoning carefully, laying out the evidence. She stopped walking twice. Once to stare at him. Once to pull out a notebook she apparently carried for exactly this category of emergency and start writing. The flask, she said. The flask, Harry agreed. The Imperious Curse demonstration was wrong, she said, writing rapidly. The real Moody would never, it's a banned curse, demonstrating it to 14-year-olds is a violation of at least 3 ministry, Hermione. Right. Yes. Focus. She kept writing. The question is what to do with this. Nothing yet, Harry said. She looked up. Nothing, if we move on Moody now, whoever is directing him adapts. We lose the intelligence advantage. He looked at her steadily. I need to know what he's planning for the remaining tasks. That means letting him keep thinking we don't know. Hermione looked at him for a long moment with the expression she wore when she was adjusting her model of him. This happened periodically. Harry would say something that didn't fit her working hypothesis about his capabilities or approach, and she'd have to update the hypothesis, and the process was visible on her face. You've been thinking about this very carefully, she said. Since October, he said. Does Dumbledore know? Dumbledore, Harry said carefully, is managing several situations simultaneously and is not accustomed to sharing his management with the people most directly affected. He may have suspicions. He hasn't acted on them. He paused. I'd rather solve the problem before it requires Dumbledore to rescue me from it. Hermione opened her mouth, closed it, and wrote something in her notebook that she underlined twice. The egg, she said. You still haven't solved the egg. I'm working on it. She looked at him. He looked back. She sighed in the specific, resigned way she sighed when she was going to help with something she had reservations about. There's a passage in Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, she said, about mer-people communication. Specifically about how their language functions differently underwater. Harry blinked. The egg opens in water. That would be my working hypothesis, yes. He stared at her. You've known this. I had a theory. I wanted you to arrive at it independently first. She had the grace to look slightly sheepish. Neville mentioned something about the prefect's bathroom. The acoustics are apparently, Hermione. Sixth door on the left of the fifth floor corridor, Pinefresh password. She closed her notebook. You're welcome. Harry went that evening. The prefect's bathroom was exactly as described, enormous, warm, with a pool-sized bath and gold taps, and when Harry sank below the water with the egg open, the screaming became singing, clear and mournful and deeply specific. Come seek us where our voices sound, we cannot sing above the ground, an hour long you'll have to look, to recover what we took, he surfaced, dripping, thinking. Something taken. An hour underwater. The Black Lake. He thought about the lake, and the cold, and the girl he'd pulled out 2 weeks ago, and found that the memory had the quality of relevant information stored against a future need. He thought about who he'd be willing to work for. About what the tournament wanted him to feel, isolated, competitive, fighting his own corner. He thought about how that framework was exactly backward for what he was actually doing, which was navigating a situation where the greatest resources available to him were the people in his life and not the skills in his own head. He got out of the bath and dried himself and went to find Neville Longbottom, because Neville knew more about magical plants than anyone at Hogwarts, including most of the herbology faculty, and Harry had a specific plant in mind. He found Fleur in the Beauxbatons common area, a section of the second floor the headmistress had arranged, the following afternoon. He knocked. A Beauxbatons student opened the door with the expression that most Beauxbatons students wore when confronted with Harry, which was a specific mixture of evaluation and adjusted expectation, and Fleur appeared behind her with her work bag over her shoulder. Walk, she said. They walked. Outside, around the castle's eastern face, where the wind came off the mountains and the December cold was honest and direct rather than the damp, managed cold of the castle's corridors. Fleur pulled her robes tighter and said nothing for a moment, which meant she was ordering something. My mother told you about Malfoy, she said. Yes. She told me she told you. Fleur glanced at him sideways. She doesn't do that. She doesn't brief people on her briefings as a general rule. She wanted you to know she trusted me with the full version, Harry said. Fleur was quiet for a moment. How are you not frightened by any of this? The question was direct and genuine, not a challenge, not flattery. Actually asking. He thought about it honestly. I was frightened of specific things when I was a child. Being hurt, mostly. Being invisible. I spent a lot of time afraid of invisible things. He paused. At some point I worked out that the fear was taking up space that was better used for thinking, and that the things I was afraid of generally couldn't be solved by being afraid of them anyway. He glanced at her. It's not that I don't feel it. I just don't give it the controls. She walked beside him, considering this. My mother said you were 14 going on 40. Your mother's assessment is generally accurate. She likes you. Fleur said it with a specific complex tone that Harry was getting better at reading, pride in her mother's judgment, slight competitive irritation at not being the exclusive authority on her own approval of him, and something warmer underneath both. She's extremely selective. In 20 years I have watched her like approximately 4 people. I'll try to maintain the standard, Harry said. She stopped walking. He stopped with her, a few feet apart, the cold mountain wind between them, and she was looking at him with the full focus look, both of them, the gray eyes direct and unguarded in the specific way she was unguarded when they were alone and she'd stopped managing the impression she made. "The second task," she said. "Something will be taken from each champion. Something they'll miss most." She held his gaze. "Gabrielle is here." Harry went very still. "She arrived yesterday," Fleur continued. "My mother brought her. For the holidays, that was the official reason. She is 6 years old and she is here and the bond," she pressed her hand briefly to her chest, the gesture that lived in both of them. "The bond is very loud about it." Harry understood. The thing taken from him would have to be something he'd miss. The tournament designers, working in 1994 with whatever information they had about Harry Potter, would identify a friend. Ron. Hermione. But the bond wasn't information accessible to them through normal channels. The bond would identify Gabrielle as the most connected anchor point, the one the soul-tier connection designated as most significant by the bond's own terms. Which meant Gabrielle in the lake. Which meant Harry knew exactly what was coming. "She's not going to be in danger," he said. It came out as simply and certainly as anything he'd ever said. Fleur looked at him. The bond was burning, sharp and bright, and something he could no longer pretend was simply background warmth, not at this distance, not at this intensity. "She's going to be fine," he said. "I promise." He meant it in the absolute, non-negotiable way that you mean things when you have no version of events that includes another outcome. Fleur's expression did something complicated and final, like a decision completing. She stepped forward, closed the distance between them, and kissed him on the cheek. Brief, warm, with the specific intention of an action that means what it means and doesn't need to be anything else. "Don't be late," she said, and walked back toward the castle. Harry stood in the December wind with the mountain cold on his face and the warmth in his chest incandescent. He was grinning. He stopped grinning because it was embarrassing and there was no one to see it, but that seemed like a poor reason. He was grinning. Christmas at Hogwarts was quieter than term proper, with the corridors emptied of most students and the great hall contracted to one long table for the small contingent that remained. Harry was there, Ron having stayed as well, and most of the Weasley presence expanded to include Fred and George, who didn't go home because they were in the middle of testing something that required a controlled environment, and Hermione, who was staying because she'd decided the library was more productive than Surrey. The Beauxbatons delegation was reduced to those competing, Fleur and her two partners, Apolline and Gabrielle, who had integrated into the holiday Hogwarts ecosystem with the specific, cheerful efficiency of a 6-year-old who finds all new environments equally compelling and approaches them without the self-consciousness that older children develop. Harry met Gabrielle on the morning of the 23rd of December. He'd been in the library, early, and she'd come in behind Apolline, who was returning a text she'd borrowed from the restricted section, a transaction that suggested Apolline's relationship with Hogwarts's librarian Madame Pants had achieved a specific diplomatic equilibrium that Harry found quietly impressive, and when Apolline set the book on the desk, Gabrielle walked directly to Harry's table with the purposeful directness of someone who has been wanting to do a thing for a while and has decided the time is now. She was small, silver blonde, with enormous blue eyes and the same quality Fleur had of occupying space with a certain unself-conscious certainty. She climbed into the chair across from Harry without being invited, which he noted as consistent with the family pattern, and looked at him. He looked back. "You're the warm one," she said, in English that was slightly more accented than either Fleur's or Apolline's but entirely clear. "Am I?" Harry said. "In here." She pressed her small hand to her chest, the gesture, the one they all did. "Since I was little. Maman said it was someone important." She regarded him with the specific evaluative seriousness of very small children, who have not yet learned to pretend they aren't assessing you. "You look like a normal boy." "I mostly am," Harry said. She shook her head. "No. Normal boys don't feel like that." She pointed at her chest. "They feel like normal. You feel like a fireplace." Apolline, at the desk behind Gabrielle, made a sound that was not quite a laugh. A fireplace, Harry repeated. Warm. And like if you got too close you might get burned. But mostly just warm. Gabrielle seemed satisfied with this description. I like it. I told Fleur and she made a face. A brief pause. She makes faces about you a lot but she's not actually annoyed. When she's actually annoyed her forehead does a different thing. Gabrielle, Apolline said, without particular emphasis. I'm just saying. Gabrielle looked at Harry earnestly. Are you going to be around a lot now? Because of the bond? That depends on several things, Harry said honestly. I hope you are, she said simply. It would be nice to have someone else who feels like a fireplace. She considered him. Do you like chess? I play, he said carefully. I'll teach you to play properly, she said. Harry, who had been beaten by Ron Weasley 17 consecutive times and had resolved to learn from a source that wasn't Ron Weasley, found this entirely agreeable. Deal, he said. Apolline was watching from the desk with an expression that she would have described as monitoring the interaction, and that was, in fact, something much closer to the specific, private warmth of a woman watching her youngest daughter be completely, effortlessly herself with someone who deserved exactly that. She went back to her book. Lucius Malfoy arrived at Hogwarts on the 26th of December. Harry didn't know this until Apolline told him, which she did by appearing at the end of the Gryffindor table at breakfast with the specific containment of someone who has just received information that requires management. He's here as a ministry liaison for tournament oversight, she said, sitting across from Harry with a cup of coffee she'd apparently brought from the Beauxbatons quarters. Cornelius Fudge invited him. Draco Malfoy is here as well, officially visiting his father for the holidays. Harry ate his toast. What's he actually here for? Evaluation. Apolline looked at him steadily. He wants to see you for himself. He's been monitoring through proxies for 6 years and he wants a direct assessment. A pause. He will also, almost certainly, attempt to speak with me. Harry's eyes moved to her. You. I am the head of a significant French wizarding family and the representative of a bloodline his entire political framework is theoretically built to respect. He will approach me through aristocratic channels, an invitation to dinner, perhaps, or a formal social call. He'll want to assess our relationship and whether the bond represents an active threat to his interests. She paused. He does not know that I am aware of his involvement in the tournament. Are you going to tell him you are? She looked at him with something that was the sophisticated older cousin of the expression Fleur wore when Harry said something that recalibrated her. No, she said. I am going to be charming and informative and tell him exactly what I want him to believe, which is that the bond is a managed situation that the Delacour family is navigating with appropriate French pragmatism. She paused. I am going to make him feel that he understands our position, which means he will stop trying to get information through other channels. And Draco? Draco Malfoy is 16 and performing his father's politics without the capability for his father's subtlety. She looked at him. He is not your concern. Don't engage with him in ways his father could use. Harry nodded. He'd had 4 years of Draco Malfoy and had long since reduced the interaction to a management exercise rather than an emotional one. There's something else, Apolline said. She set down her cup. Lucius has been communicating with the French Ministry's Department of Blood Rights. We intercepted the correspondence 3 weeks ago. She looked at him directly. He was inquiring about the legal framework for bond dissolution. Harry set down his fork. Solitaire bonds don't dissolve, he said. No. They don't. But Lucius either doesn't know that or is hoping there's a legal mechanism that mimics dissolution. She held his eyes. What he found was that the only way a solitaire bond terminates is the death of the primary anchor. Either one. A beat. Yours, or Fleur's. The sentence sat in the winter morning air of the great hall and Harry felt it land in exactly the way it was meant to be felt, not as abstract information but as a specific, personal threat that included Fleur's name. He was quiet for a moment. "He won't touch her," he said. "No," Apolline agreed. "He will not. Or Gabrielle." "No." Her voice was flat and certain, the way it got when she was finished with the diplomatic register entirely. "How do you want to play this?" Harry asked. She looked at him, and in the look was something he was only starting to be able to read, not approval exactly, but something like recognition. The recognition of a person who has thought carefully about something for a long time suddenly finding evidence that their thinking was right. "I want to be very clear about something," she said. "I am not here to protect you. You are quite capable of protecting yourself and I have no interest in managing you. I am here because we are a family, however improbable the circumstances, and in our family, we do not let members face threats alone." She looked at him. "Do you understand the distinction?" "Yes," Harry said. And he did, the difference between protection as control and solidarity as choice, and everything it meant that she was drawing that line clearly. "Then we play this together," Apolline said. "All of us. You, Fleur, and I." "Three front," Harry said. "Like you told me at the Yule Ball prep." "Like I told you." She stood, picking up her coffee cup. "Lucius will approach me tonight, I expect. I will be cooperative and forthcoming about everything I want him to know." A pause at the edge of rye. "I am very forthcoming when I choose to be." Harry watched her walk back across the great hall with the specific movement of someone who is entirely comfortable being the most formidable person in a room of mostly empty chairs. He went back to his toast. He was, he thought, beginning to understand what family felt like. Not the performance of it. Not the obligation. The actual thing, people who show up not because they have to but because they've decided to, who trust you with accurate information, who treat your decisions as legitimate rather than managing you toward conclusions they've already reached. He pressed his hand briefly to his sternum. 3 distinct threads, warm and present. He let out a slow breath, and went to find Neville to discuss gillyweed. Lucius Malfoy passed Harry in the corridor that afternoon. It was in the entrance hall, near the goblet display that had been covered and shrouded since Halloween, and Lucius was walking with Draco and one of his ministry attendants, and Harry was heading toward the library, and they met in the middle with the specific inevitability of things that have been heading toward each other for years. Lucius was exactly as Harry had been expecting from 4 years of Draco as context, tall, silver blonde, with the groomed, contained elegance of a man who understood that presentation was political. He had cold gray eyes, slightly too calculated for genuine warmth, and the kind of face that had practiced a specific expression for so long it had become the face's default setting. He looked at Harry with that practiced expression, civil, faintly superior, almost bored. Harry looked back with no expression at all. "Potter," Lucius said. "Mild, almost friendly." "Malfoy," Harry said. Not to Draco. To Lucius. With exactly the same register. Something moved in Lucius's eyes, very briefly, not quite surprise, but adjustment. He'd expected something other than complete, level calm. "Terrible business, being entered against your will," Lucius said. "The ministry is quite concerned." "I'm sure," Harry said. "I understand you've been spending time with the Beauxbatons delegation." His voice was still mild. Still almost friendly. "The Delacour family, an excellent bloodline. French, of course, but one makes allowances." He paused. "I had no idea they had connections in Britain." Harry looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "They do now." He walked past. He heard nothing behind him, no response, no continuation. Just the silence of a man recalibrating, standing in an entrance hall with the goblet cover behind him and a 14-year-old boy's back receding without a single backward glance. Harry didn't look back. He went to the library. He found Fleur already at their table, which was their table now in the specific, unnegotiated way that things become shared when two people keep choosing them independently. Lucius Malfoy is in the castle, he said, sitting down. I know. She didn't look up from her book. He passed the Beauxbatons quarters 20 minutes ago. Draco was with him and made a comment about my heritage in the hearing of 3 of my housemates. What kind of comment? The kind that tells me he's been raised by someone who resents what my family represents. She turned a page. I told him, in French, that his father's insecurity was showing, and that he might consider addressing the structural causes rather than the symptoms. She glanced up. He didn't speak French well enough to fully follow it. Which was rather the point. Harry looked at her. You're in a very good mood, he said. I am, she agreed. My mother had tea with Lucius Malfoy this afternoon and I was allowed to be present, and I spent 45 minutes watching her dismantle a man's entire working intelligence picture while appearing to confirm it. She paused, and the satisfaction in her face was entirely genuine. She told him we regard the bond as a minor ancestral anomaly that our family is managing through standard Veela protocols. She implied you were entirely unaware of its full implications. She suggested our interest in the tournament was purely academic. And he believed her. He believed her because she was telling him 3 accurate things and he couldn't identify which 3. She held his eyes, and in the gray of her gaze was something that had been building since October, since the library, since the lake in December, since the freezing wind on the castle's eastern face. He's frightened of what we are together. He has been for years. And he has no idea that we know exactly what he's been doing. The warmth between them, not the bond exactly, but the thing adjacent to it, the real and chosen thing they'd been building in libraries and cold corridors, was very present. He'll move before the second task, Harry said. Yes. She set her book down. So we move first. He looked at her. Together, she said. Not a question. Together, he said. The word sat between them with the specific, permanent weight of something that had been true for a long time and had just been said for the first time. Chapter 4, the second task. Harry was in the water before the starting cannon finished echoing. Not dramatically, he didn't dive, didn't perform for the crowd packed onto the scaffolding above the lake's surface, didn't acknowledge the way the other champions were adjusting goggles or performing last-minute wand checks. He just stepped off the platform and went under, because the bond had been screaming at him since 5 that morning and he'd been awake to hear it, lying in his dormitory with his hand on his chest feeling Gabrielle's thread pulled taut like a wire. She was already down there. The gillyweed hit his system 12 seconds after submersion, the specific, comprehensive wrongness of your body rearranging itself, gills splitting along his neck, his hands webbing, the cold water suddenly something he could process rather than fight. He adjusted and went deeper. The Black Lake in February was its own kind of world. Dark and green-gray, visibility maybe 20 feet in the upper water and less as he descended, with the lake floor's ambient life moving in the middle distance, Grindylows tracking him from the weed beds with their pale, interested eyes, a cluster of something he didn't stop to identify moving fast along the bottom 20 feet below. He swam hard. He wasn't navigating by sight. He was navigating by the bond, Gabrielle's thread pulling him forward and down with a specificity that made every other method of direction finding irrelevant. Not northwest, not toward the cluster of rocks he'd identified on his reconnaissance swim 2 weeks ago. Directly, inexorably, toward a small bright point of connection that his chest could locate more accurately than his eyes could see. He had 50 minutes of gillyweed. He had a plan. He had a second plan if the first one failed and a third one if the second failed, because he'd spent 3 weeks talking to Neville about underwater magical properties and Hermione about mere-people social structures and Apolline, in a conversation at 6 in the morning in that 4th-floor corridor, about the specific magic the tournament's designers would have used to put the hostages under. He'd prepared. The mere-people village emerged from the gloom at approximately 8 minutes in, a cluster of stone structures in the lake floor, crude and functional, decorated with bones and salvaged objects in the way that made it clear these were people who had their own aesthetics and didn't require anyone's approval of them. The statues at the perimeter were new additions, recently carved, depicting something that might have been victory but might have been warning. 4 figures were tethered to a stone pillar at the village center. Ron Weasley, slack and unconscious, hair floating in the current. Hermione Granger, one hand still loosely holding a book she'd apparently been carrying when they took her, her expression even in unconsciousness carrying a slight frown as if she disapproved of the situation. A dark-haired girl Harry didn't recognize, Krum's hostage, presumably. And Gabrielle. Gabrielle was small and still, silver blonde hair spreading around her head in the current, and the bond, the growing, bright thread that had been getting louder since October, was close now, arms reach close, singing. Harry didn't hesitate. He drew his wand and cut the bindings on Gabrielle first. She drifted free and he caught her under the arms before the current could take her. She was breathing, the sleeping enchantment had a slow, even rhythm to it that said fine, just under, and he pulled her close and turned to the others. The merpeople were watching from the perimeter, the way they always watched things they found interesting, which was with the patient, comprehensive attention of creatures who had been in this lake since before Hogwarts existed and expected to be here long after. One of them, larger, armed with a stone trident, moved forward and said something in the grinding, musical murmush that Harry couldn't follow above water but that underwater had the quality of very cold wind. Harry looked at it steadily. He'd read about merpeople's social structures. He'd talked to Hermione about their protocols. He understood that they respected directness and had no patience for aggression or performance, and that they had designed these tasks with the expectation of 1 hostage per champion and would consider the taking of multiple hostages a violation of the trial's terms. He said, in the halting, largely pronunciation-based murmush he'd practiced for 2 weeks with a waterlogged copy of a text Hermione had found, that he was taking the child, who was his, and offering no disrespect to the trial, and that the other hostages would be recovered by their champions. The large merperson looked at him. Then it looked at Gabrielle, unconscious and tucked against Harry's side. Then it said something else, shorter, in a tone that had a different quality to it, not threatening, something closer to acknowledgement, and moved aside. Harry went to the pillar and cut Ron's bindings as well. He couldn't carry 3 people and he knew it. He also couldn't leave Ron and Hermione down here with their champions potentially delayed, because Krum's events in the lake were producing a specific kind of disturbance Harry could feel in the water 20 feet out, the displacement of something large and magically significant moving in the wrong direction. And Cedric, he could hear the approach of something that might be Cedric but was still several minutes away. He made a decision. He conjured a bubble of warm air around Ron and Hermione's heads, not the textbook charm, a modified version he'd worked out with Neville that used the lake's own water pressure to maintain structural integrity, and cast a slow lifting charm on each of them, setting them drifting upward at a controlled pace. They'd surface in 3 minutes and float until someone with a boat reached them. Not elegant. Extremely functional. He took Gabrielle and went up. He broke the surface at the 22-minute mark, well within the hour limit, and came up in the center of a moment of absolute, collective held breath. The scaffolding of spectators had that specific quality of a crowd that has been watching something and isn't sure yet what they're watching, which resolved into noise as Harry surfaced with Gabrielle, the noise starting from one section and expanding outward like a wave. He got to the platform. There were officials there, Bagman with his magically amplified voice already producing commentary, a healer with warming charms ready. Harry lifted Gabrielle onto the platform and the healer was there immediately, wand moving, breaking the sleeping enchantment in a standard 3-beat pattern. Gabrielle blinked. She looked up at the gray February sky and then at the healer leaning over her and then, with the specific, targeted directness she'd demonstrated in the library at Christmas, she looked for Harry. He was kneeling beside her, dripping, gills already retreating as the gillyweed wore off. "You were late," she said. 22 minutes, Harry said. The brief said 1 hour. "I was down there for a long time before the task started," she said, with considerable dignity for someone who had just been magically sedated and held underwater by merpeople. "It was boring." "I'll take that as feedback," Harry said. She sat up, assisted by the healer, and looked at him with those enormous blue eyes. The bond between them was warm and present and completely undisturbed, the same steady brightness it had been all winter, and Harry felt something loosen in his chest that he hadn't realized had been tight since 5 in the morning. "I knew you'd come," she said, simply. "I know," he said. She reached out and took his hand. Not dramatically. Just held it, the small warm hand of a 6-year-old who had decided this was where her hand went, the same uncomplicated certainty she'd had since Christmas chess. Harry let her. The judges' scoring happened in the particular confusion of officials consulting, spectators buzzing, champions being toweled off and assessed. Madame Pomfrey examined Harry with the brisk, slightly exasperated thoroughness she brought to all his post-event care, noted that his gillyweed metabolism was unusually efficient, recorded a minor cold water exposure level, and released him with warming charms and the expression she wore when she wanted to say something about his choices and had decided the moment wasn't right. Fleur had not completed the task. She'd been blocked at the village perimeter by a cluster of Grindylows, drawn by the Veela magic in her blood in a way that wasn't accounted for in the tournament designer's specifications, which Harry noted as either genuine oversight or deliberate sabotage with a very specific target in mind, and had surfaced early, distressed. Gabrielle's absence raw and visible on her face in the way it was visible when you'd been reaching for a bond connection and found it terrifyingly absent. She was on the platform when Harry surfaced. He saw her face when she saw Gabrielle. He'd seen people relieved before. He'd seen relief that was grateful and relief that was tearful and the specific relief of someone who has spent time in an experience they didn't want to repeat. What he saw on Fleur Delacour's face when she saw her sister alive and alert and holding Harry's hand was none of those things exactly, it was larger, more fundamental, the relief of someone whose entire orientation of the world had just been confirmed rather than simply corrected. She crossed the platform and crouched and pulled Gabrielle against her, and Gabrielle said, "Fleur, you're wet," against her shoulder, and Fleur made a sound that was partly a laugh and partly not, and Harry stood back and looked at the lake and gave them a moment. Then Fleur looked up at him over Gabrielle's head. Her eyes were bright in the specific way they got when she was managing a feeling that was larger than her usual management capacity. She said nothing. The sharp thread in his chest burned so hot it was almost audible. He looked back at her. He nodded, once, which meant "I know, you don't have to say it, it's fine, she's fine, you're fine." She held his gaze for a long moment and then she nodded back, which meant "I know you know, and I know what that cost, and I'm not going to perform this in public but I'm also not going to pretend it isn't what it is." 6 years of warmth in 2 nods. He turned back to the lake, where Ron and Hermione were being retrieved by one of the officials' boats, and waited. The scores, when Bagman announced them, produced a response from the crowd that had a different quality than the Dragon task scores had. Harry, 47 out of 50. The highest marks of the task. The points came with the specific commentary that Bagman gave his maximum entertainment interpretation to, the gillyweed, the mermish, the bubble charm on the secondary hostages, all of it delivered in the breathless hyperbole of a man who understood that the task had produced something worth discussing. Crumb, 40 points. Victor had eventually found his hostage, the dark-haired girl, who turned out to be a Durmstrang student named Anya, though his approach had involved partial transfiguration that had functioned but not elegantly. Cedric, 47 as well, matching Harry, having navigated the lake with a bubblehead charm and considerable competence. Fleur, 25, for having entered the water and made a genuine attempt. She accepted the score with her chin up and her expression entirely composed, and Harry knew that the composed expression was real. She'd told him, in the library 3 weeks ago, that she'd rather be beaten fairly than win through something she hadn't earned, and she'd meant it, but that underneath the composure was a specific, private frustration she'd deal with in her own time. He walked over to her after the scoring. "The Grindylows," he said. "Were not an accident," she said, without heat. The task designers would have charmed the lake to minimize Grindylow interference with competitors. What happened was specific and deliberate. She looked at him steadily. "Someone told them my heritage." "I know." "Malfoy." Almost certainly. He thought of the man in the entrance hall, the mild voice, the calculated eyes. He needed you to fail here. Your score affects your standing. Your standing affects how much weight your presence carries when things escalate. He paused. He's playing multiple games. As are we, she said. As are we. She looked at him for a long moment with the assessing look that had softened, over months, from evaluating him to something more like simply seeing him. You said Gabrielle would be fine, she said. She was. You made a promise and you kept it. She said it as plainly as she said everything, but it landed in the space between them with the specific weight of something she'd been thinking about since he'd said it in the December wind. Do you understand how rare that is? I only promise things I intend to do, Harry said. She looked at him. Yes, she said. That's what I mean. Lucius Malfoy found Harry that evening. Not in a corridor. Not accidentally. He arrived at the entrance to the Gryffindor common room at 8 o'clock with an assistant and a specific, premeditated quality, and the fat lady opened for him because ministry liaison credentials apparently overrode portrait security, which Harry filed as something Dumbledore should know about and would be told. Harry was in the common room with Ron and Hermione when Lucius walked in, and the room shifted, the specific discomfort of a space that wasn't meant for someone suddenly containing them. Ron went rigid. Hermione's hand moved toward her wand and then stopped, which was the correct instinct and she was right to have both. Harry stood up. Mr. Potter, Lucius said. A word. Here's fine, Harry said. Something moved in Lucius's calculated gray eyes, the adjustment of a man recalibrating a conversation that was supposed to happen in private, happening in the middle of a common room full of students. He was, Harry noted, not comfortable with it, and the discomfort was interesting because men like Lucius Malfoy weren't supposed to be discomfited by location. They were supposed to own rooms. He didn't own this room. The tournament committee, Lucius said, has concerns about the second task's outcome. Which concerns? Harry said. The taking of multiple hostages by a single champion. Lucius paused. It may be considered unsporting. I read the rules, Harry said. Thoroughly. There's no stipulation against recovering additional hostages. In fact, the rules specify that additional marks may be awarded for exceptional concern shown for fellow champions' hostages. He let a beat of silence make itself comfortable. Bagman's scoring reflected that. Lucius's expression didn't change. The controlled face, the practiced presentation. But his hands, Harry noticed, the hands that held the silver cane, tightened very slightly. The Delacour girl's recovery in particular, Gabrielle Delacour, Harry said, was placed in that lake as my hostage. The tournament's own magic identified her. If the committee has concerns about that specific identification, I'd suggest they look at why a 6-year-old family member of a competing champion was designated as the most significant person to the fourth champion, rather than any of his classmates. He looked at Lucius steadily. That's an interesting question. I've been thinking about it. The common room was very quiet. Lucius looked at him across the width of it with the specific, recalibrated assessment of someone encountering a problem that has turned out to be larger than their initial measurement. You're very confident for 14, he said. I'm accurate for 14, Harry said. There's a difference. Another beat. Lucius smiled, the smile he used when conversations weren't going the way he'd engineered them to go and he'd decided to close them gracefully. The committee will review the scoring. That's all I wanted to convey. He paused at the portrait hole. Give my regards to the Delacour family. I will, Harry said. He watched Lucius leave. The portrait hole closed. Ron let out a breath like a man who'd been holding it for several minutes. Bloody hell, he said, with considerable feeling. Language, Hermione said, automatically, then appeared to reconsider the situational relevance. Actually, that seems fair. Harry sat back down. He picked up the charms text he'd been reading before the interruption and found his page. "He's going to appeal the scoring," he said, turning a page. "He won't succeed, but he'll try. More importantly, he wanted to see how I'd handle a direct approach." "And?" Hermione said. "Now he knows." Harry read his page. "Which is useful information for both of us." Hermione looked at Ron. Ron looked at Hermione. They had one of the silent conversations that Harry had learned to read by their facial components, this one communicating something along the lines of, "When did he become like this?" and the response, "I think he's always been like this, we just didn't have context." "Harry," Hermione said carefully. "How much of this have you been managing that you haven't told us about?" He considered the question honestly. "Most of it," he said. "I'm going to need to tell you about some things." "The Delacour family," she said. Not surprised. She'd been reading the situation for months with the specific, comprehensive attention she gave everything she decided was important. "Yes. There's a bond," she said. He looked at her. "I've been reading about Veela ancestral ward magic since November," she said, with the composure of someone who had done considerable homework and was prepared to present her findings. "I didn't say anything because it wasn't my information to raise and I wanted you to tell me when you were ready." "But Harry, a ward stone bond at Soltier is not," she stopped. "It's not small." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." "Are you all right?" she asked. Directly, without the scaffolding of all the academic context, just the actual question. He thought about Gabrielle's hand in his on the platform. About Fleur's face when she'd seen her sister alive. About Apolline in the fourth-floor corridor at 7 in the morning with 2 cups of coffee, saying we are a family without sentiment or performance. "Yeah," he said. "I really am." Apolline's response to Lucius's appeal arrived the following morning. Harry heard about it from Fleur, who described it with the specific, contained satisfaction of someone reporting a well-executed military operation. Apolline had submitted a 17-page brief to the tournament committee, co-signed by 3 French ministry officials, detailing the precise text of the tournament rules, the historical precedent for multi-hostage recovery in Triwizard documentation from 1294 and 1407, and a formal objection to what she described as an attempt by a member of the British ministry to interfere with scoring on behalf of an implicit interest. The implicit interest was not named. It didn't need to be. The appeal was rejected by noon. Lucius, Harry understood from the bond's general impression of Apolline, which was running very warm and something that felt like sharp satisfaction, had received the committee's response in the presence of 3 journalists from both the British and French magical press, because Apolline had timed the submission and the rejection with the specific, clockmaker precision of someone who had been planning this particular moment for several weeks. The story in the Prophet the next day was careful and somewhat bewildered, British Ministry Liaison's tournament appeal rejected on procedural grounds, but the story in the French equivalent, the Informateur, was considerably less circumspect, mentioning Lucius by name and noting the specific history of his previous ministry interventions on tournament-related matters. Harry read both at breakfast. He looked up at the staff table where Dumbledore was reading his own copy of the Prophet with the expression of a man assembling pieces of a picture he'd been uncertain about. Then he looked at the Beauxbatons table, where Apolline sat with her coffee and her French newspaper, wearing the equanimity of someone who had done exactly what she'd intended to do and found it satisfactory. She caught his eye across the hall. She raised her cup slightly. He raised his pumpkin juice. Victor Crumb appeared at Harry's shoulder in the library that afternoon. Harry had been expecting him. There'd been a specific quality to Crumb's presence at the task results, watching Harry talk to Lucius from 20 feet away, that had the look of someone filing information and planning a follow-up conversation. "The Malfoy man," Crumb said, sitting across from him in the library. "He came to Durmstrang in September. Before the tournament. Spoke with Karkaroff." He paused. "I don't know what they discussed. But Karkaroff was different after." Harry looked at him. I trust Karkaroff the way I trust anyone who changes after speaking with powerful men, Krum said, which was the most comprehensive expression of no trust Harry had heard in compact form. I am telling you because you should know that whatever Malfoy is building, he seeded it before the tournament started. I know, Harry said. Thank you for telling me anyway. Krum nodded, the pragmatic Eastern European nod, full of meaning distributed evenly across it. The final task. The maze. He looked at Harry. I will compete honestly. I will win if I can. I will not be someone's instrument. A pause. You should know that not everyone here is. I know that too, Harry said. Krum looked at him for a long moment, the hawkish face, the measured eyes. You are going to be a problem for many people for a long time, he said. Probably, Harry agreed. Good. Krum stood. It is necessary. He left. Harry watched him go and thought about what it meant that the strongest external champion in the tournament had just, in his particular, economical way, offered solidarity. Not alliance. Not strategy. Something simpler and harder to manufacture than either. He picked up his quill and went back to his work. 3 days after the task, Harry was crossing the third-floor corridor at 9 at night, returning from a meeting with Dumbledore about tournament procedure, a meeting that had been mostly Dumbledore watching him with the specific, troubled look of a man who knew he'd missed something and was trying to reconstruct what, when Moody fell into step beside him. Not the real Moody. He'd been certain for months. Tonight it was operating with the specific, contained tension of someone managing a situation that was slightly ahead of its intended timeline. Good performance in the lake, Potter, it said. Thank you, Harry said. The maze is coming. Third task. The magical eye spun in its socket, tracking things Harry couldn't see. You'd want to practice your hexes. Dark creatures, disorientation, no outside help. I've been practicing, Harry said. Specific things. Impediment jinx, obviously. Reductor curse for obstacles. The eye tracked toward him. The summoning charm already saved you in the first task. Different applications in the maze. Think about it. Harry walked beside it and listened, and noted every piece of advice with the specific, careful attention he gave things that were shaped like gifts but might be maps. He was being steered toward something. Every piece of advice narrowed the range of possible actions in the maze. The reducto for obstacles, specific obstacles that someone had put in the maze. The summoning charm for, the cup. He was being advised toward the cup. The cup that was a portkey. He didn't change his pace. Didn't tighten. Didn't give any of this to his face. Appreciate the advice, he said. Stay alive, Potter, Moody said, and turned off down a side corridor. Harry kept walking. He kept walking all the way to the fourth-floor corridor, which was empty at 9 at night, and he stood there in the dark for a moment and thought through everything with the systematic, unhurried clarity he developed over years of needing to think rather than react. The cup. A portkey. Taking him somewhere. The graveyard, probably, that was the architecture of a Voldemort restoration ritual, which was what all the threads led to. He'd been reading about dark magic theory with Hermione for 3 months, building context, and the theory assembled itself, blood ritual, the killing curse's echo still tied to him, the specific magic that could restore a body using the blood of an enemy. He needed to be there for it to work. Someone needed him at that ritual. He stood in the fourth-floor corridor and he made a decision that was not the obvious one, was not the defensive one, was not the one the people managing this situation had anticipated. He was going to let it happen. Not passively. Not carelessly. He was going to walk into the maze and touch that cup with every preparation in place that 6 months of knowing had allowed him to make. Because the thing they'd forgotten, the thing Lucius Malfoy had been cataloging for 6 years and still somehow hadn't fully understood, was that Harry Potter walking into a dangerous situation was not the same as Harry Potter walking into a trap. He was going to see Voldemort. He was going to see the ritual. And then he was going to come back. He pressed his hand to his chest. The 3 threads, warm and steady. He thought, deliberately, for the first time, with full intention, toward the sharp one. I need you to know something. When the 3rd task happens, if things go wrong, if something happens that you feel through the bond, don't panic. I know what I'm doing. The sharp thread pulsed. Not simple acknowledgement this time. The pulse carried something complex and multi-layered, not consent, because Fleur didn't give unconditional consent to anything, but the specific quality of a person who is deeply afraid and is choosing, deliberately, to trust rather than act on the fear. Come back, it said, in the wordless language of 6 years. I intend to, he said back. He went to find Dumbledore. Not to tell him everything. But to tell him enough, about Moody, about Crouch Jr., about the specific mechanism he'd identified, that when things moved, Dumbledore would be positioned to act on the right information rather than the wrong assumptions. The conversation was in the headmaster's office, at 10 at night, and it was the most direct conversation Harry had ever had with Albus Dumbledore, which was significant because Dumbledore was constitutionally inclined toward indirection. Harry sat across the desk and said, Moody is Barty Crouch Jr. under Polyjuice. He's been directing me toward the tournament cup because it's a portkey. I believe it leads to a ritual site for Voldemort's restoration. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, with the specific, heavy quiet of a man absorbing the implications of being outthought, How long have you known? October, Harry said. You didn't come to me. I needed to understand what I was dealing with before I told anyone else, Harry said. And I needed to know what you'd do with the information. Dumbledore looked at him. Something moved across the old face, not offense, something more honest than that. And now? Now I'm telling you because I've decided to go into that maze regardless, and I need you ready on the other end. He met the blue eyes steadily. I need you to trust that I know what I'm doing, and to be ready to act on whatever comes through that portkey. A very long silence. You are 14 years old, Dumbledore said. Yes, Harry said. And I've been dealing with this since I was 1 year old, and then again since I was 11, so I'd argue that I have more specific experience with this particular threat than anyone else in this building. He paused. With respect. Dumbledore looked at him for a long, measured moment that contained something Harry hadn't seen in the headmaster's eyes before, not amusement, not the careful management of a resource he valued. Something closer to recognition. The recognition of a man who had spent decades steering other people toward outcomes and was looking at someone who had quietly, without announcement, decided to steer himself. Tell me what you need, Dumbledore said. Harry told him. The evening before the 3rd task, Harry was in the courtyard. It was early June, warm, the kind of evening that Hogwarts produced in summer like a deliberate argument against the grey weight of the rest of the year. The grass was properly green, the light long and golden, and Harry sat on the low wall near the training grounds with no particular purpose except the specific, quiet necessity of an hour without thinking. Fleur found him. She sat beside him without preamble, close enough that their arms almost touched, and looked out at the grounds in the same direction he was looking. The evening light caught her silver hair and made it something else, warmer, almost amber at the edges. They sat in silence for a moment. Tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow, he agreed. My mother wants me to ask you, she stopped. Started again. My mother wants to say things to you tonight but she believes you need quiet before something significant, and she's wrestling with both impulses. A pause. She sent me instead. To say nothing? To sit here. A beat. Also to say that she has been in contact with the French Minister for Magic and 3 senior aurors who will be positioned near the tournament grounds tomorrow. Not officially. Not in ways that Malfoy could identify or object to. Just present. Harry felt the warmth expand in his chest. Tell her thank you. You can tell her yourself. Fleur was quiet a moment. She'll be here when you get back. When, not if. He heard that. Tell me something, he said. Something not about tomorrow. She looked at him sideways, curious. What kind of something? Anything. What you're planning after this tournament is over. What you want to do. He meant it genuinely. She had ambitions and plans she'd alluded to but never laid out fully, and he'd been waiting for the right moment to ask. She looked at the grounds for a moment, and the question seemed to settle her in some way, shift her out of the specific tension of tomorrow. The ministry, she said. Not the French ministry. International Magical Cooperation, possibly. Or the Department of Magical Creatures, but the real department, not the one that exists to file Grindylow complaints. The legal frameworks around magical beings and persons, being and personhood. She paused. Veela are classified as semi-beings. I am considered a semi-being by British law. I intend to spend a considerable portion of my adult life correcting that. You'd be good at it, Harry said. She looked at him. You say that very matter-of-factly. It's matter of fact. He looked at her. You're the most effectively precise person I know. Put you in front of a legislative committee and they won't know what happened to them. A pause. Also you scare people a bit and that's useful in legal reform work. She stared at him for a moment. Then she laughed, the real one, the genuine one, startled out of her the same way it had been in November, and the sound of it in the warm June evening did something specific to the sharp thread in his chest that he was done pretending he didn't notice. You scare people considerably more than I do, she said. I don't think that's true. Lucius Malfoy walked away from a common room conversation looking like he'd picked up a rock and found something unexpected underneath. She looked at him with the gray eyes, warm now, all the early careful management of them long gone. That is not nothing. He should be scared, Harry said. He's made poor choices. Yes. She was quiet a moment, and then, with the directness she gave everything when she decided to give it, I'm glad the bond exists. He looked at her. I know I wasn't, she said. For a long time. But I was working with incomplete information and a great deal of pride, and now I have more information and slightly less pride and, she held his gaze. I'm glad. I've always been glad, Harry said simply. Even when I didn't know what it was. It was the only thing that felt like company, when I was young. Whatever was at the other end of it, it never seemed to find me deficient. Her expression did something that he'd only seen it do twice before, the door fully open, no management, no composition, just Fleur looking at him the way people look at things they've decided matter. We don't, she said. Find you deficient. The evening light went long and golden around them and the warmth in his chest was incandescent. He looked at the grounds. She sat beside him with their arms touching now, no space left between, and neither of them moved away. They stayed until the light was gone. Chapter 5, Aristocratic Panic. The letter arrived on the 4th of June, 2 days before the third task. Harry found it at breakfast, not delivered by Owl, which was the specific, pointed irregularity he noticed first. It was on his plate when he sat down, sealed with a crest he didn't recognize, the wax a deep, expensive green. He turned it over twice before opening it, scanning the envelope with the careful attention he gave things that arrived in unconventional ways. The crest was the Wisengamot's formal seal. The letter was brief, written in the specific register of legal language that wanted to appear neutral and achieved the opposite. Mr. Potter, you are hereby notified that the Wisengamot Committee on Magical Bonds and Ancestral Rights has opened a formal inquiry into the validity and legality of the alleged Ward Stone bond between yourself and members of the Delacour family of Lyon, France. You are requested to appear before a preliminary hearing on the 8th of June. Non-appearance will be taken as implicit admission of the bond's fraudulent basis. Dolores J. Umbridge, Senior Undersecretary to the Minister. Harry read it once. He folded it, put it in his pocket, and ate his eggs. Hermione was watching him from across the table with the expression she wore when she'd already identified a situation and was waiting to see how he classified it. Ron was eating with the focused attention he gave food, but his eyes kept moving to Harry's face. "Legal challenge," Harry said, without looking up from his plate. "Umbridge." "Umbridge," Hermione repeated, and the name came out of her mouth with a specific quality that meant she'd already formed a complete opinion. "She's Fudge's instrument. Whatever this is, it originates with someone who has Fudge's ear and enough influence to fast-track a Wisengamot inquiry in," she frowned. "Wisengamot hearings take months to convene. A preliminary hearing in 4 days would require extraordinary pressure applied directly to the committee chair." "Someone applied it," Harry said. "Malfoy," Ron said, without looking up from his breakfast. Harry and Hermione both looked at him. Ron shrugged. "Dad's talked about Malfoy's Wisengamot connection since I was 7. He basically owns half the committee through donations and family favors. If he wanted a hearing convened in 4 days, he'd just make some calls." He stabbed a sausage. "Dad says the Wisengamot runs on 2 things. Tradition and obligation. Malfoy has warehouses of both." Harry folded his napkin. "I need to tell Apolline." "I expect," Hermione said, opening her own copy of the letter she'd clearly already had a look at, because she'd been angled toward his plate since he sat down, "that Apolline Delacour already knows." She did. Harry found her in the 4th-floor corridor, their corridor. It had become that, this unremarkable stretch of castle between the abandoned classroom and the secondary library, and she was standing at the tapestry again, but with a different quality today. She wasn't looking at it. She was standing in front of it with the specific, contained stillness of someone running through calculations. She turned when she heard him. "You received the letter," she said. "An hour ago. I received mine at 6 this morning." She turned fully toward him. She was in traveling robes, dark blue, which he'd learned meant she'd been somewhere or was planning to be. "Lucius has been more thorough than I anticipated. The inquiry is challenging the bond itself, not your character, not the circumstances, the ontological validity of a Saltier-Ward Stone bond formed without deliberate intent by a non-Veela." She looked at him steadily. "It's a creative angle." "It's a long shot," Harry said. "It's designed to be a long shot," she said. "A long shot that requires resources to defend against. Resources of time, legal expertise, attention. While we are managing a Wisengamot inquiry, we are not managing other things. That is the point." She was quiet for a moment. "He's also filed a separate challenge with the French ministry through an intermediary. Challenging my fitness as the head of the Delacour ancestral wards, on the grounds that I negligently allowed an uncontrolled ward stone activation that created an unstable bond affecting minor children." Harry's jaw tightened, briefly, before he controlled it. "Gabrielle," he said. "Yes." Apolline's voice was the temperature of deep water. He mentioned Gabrielle by name. "As a child who has been adversely affected by an unrequested magical bond." Harry thought about Gabrielle on the platform, telling him he was late. Thought about Christmas chess and you feel like a fireplace. Thought about what it meant to weaponize a 6-year-old's name in a legal document. "Where do we stand?" he said. "Better than he thinks." She turned from the tapestry with the decisiveness of a woman who has finished computing and is ready to act. "The British inquiry is the immediate concern. The hearing is the 8th, 2 days after the 3rd task. He wants you tired, destabilized, operating from a position of minimal resources." She looked at him. "We are going to disrupt that timeline." "How?" "We respond today. Not through the standard channels, through the International Confederation of Wizards, which has jurisdiction over cross-national magical bonds. A ward stone bond that crosses borders is by definition their domain, not the Wisengamots. Filing with the ICW immediately creates a jurisdictional conflict that the Wisengamot Committee must resolve before proceeding." She paused. Resolving it will take 3 weeks minimum. The hearing gets delayed. That buys time, Harry said. It buys time, it embarrasses the committee for overreaching, and it puts Lucius's name adjacent to a case that the international press will describe as an attempt to use British institutional authority to invalidate a French family's ancestral rights. She looked at him steadily. He has many allies. He has few allies who are willing to be publicly associated with attacking the Delacour ancestral ward tradition. What do you need from me? A statement, she said. Signed, witnessed, in both English and French. Your account of the ward stone activation. The date, the circumstances, everything you remember. She paused. I know it requires revisiting things you'd rather not. The Dursleys, he said. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. I've never told anyone, he said. Not reluctant. Just accurate. I know. Her voice had a specific quality when she spoke about the Dursleys, not pity, which he'd never have accepted from her, but the quiet, banked anger of someone who has had 6 years to form an opinion about a set of people who hurt a child and called it management. You don't have to include everything. The relevant elements are the injury, the blood, the activation. That's what the ICW statement needs. I'll include everything, Harry said. She looked at him. If we're doing this properly, he said, we do it properly. The full picture is more useful than the selective one. And I'd rather say it once, clearly, than have it come out in pieces later on someone else's terms. Apolline looked at him for a long moment with the gold eyes, and something moved across her face that wasn't an expression she'd have let most people see. Yes, she said quietly. All right. They were in the 4th-floor corridor for 2 hours. Harry talked. Apolline wrote, in the rapid, precise shorthand of someone trained in legal documentation, her face controlled and her quill moving without pause. He told her everything, the cupboard, the meals, the belt buckle and the rings and the cold, the garden at midnight, the blood and the stone and what it had felt like when the activation happened. He told it the way he told everything, flat, factual, with the specific emotional neutrality of someone who has been over the material enough times in their own head that they've separated the information from the feeling. When he finished, Apolline was still writing. She finished. Set down the quill. Read through the statement with the same focused attention she gave all documents, making 2 small corrections. Then she set it on her knee and looked at him, and she allowed herself, for exactly the space of one breath, to look like what she actually felt. You were 8 years old, she said. Yes. You were alone with this for 6 years. Yes. She looked at him for a moment more. Then she picked up her quill again with the decisive movement of a woman returning to her tools. Sign here, she said. And here. She produced a second copy. And here. The second copy goes to the ICW by Secure Owl today. The first copy stays with me. He signed. She blotted the ink and folded both copies with the careful precision of important documents. Then she stood, and Harry stood with her, and she put both hands on his shoulders in the way she'd done twice before, the gesture she used instead of the things she'd decided not to say. We have 3 fronts, she said. The British inquiry, the French challenge, and the third task. She looked at him directly. I need you to trust that Fleur and I will manage the first 2 while you manage the third. Tell me what you need from me for the legal fronts. That statement is sufficient for now. Anything further, I'll ask. She released his shoulders. For the third task, I need you to come back from it. I've been told, he said. You've been told by Fleur, she said, who tells you because she is in love with you and cannot quite bring herself to say so yet. She watched the specific thing his face did at that, which was nothing on the surface and something enormous underneath. I am telling you because you are my son by bond and I have no interest in losing you. The word son landed in the quiet corridor like something physical. Harry looked at her for a moment with nothing at all on his face. Then he said, very quietly, "I'll come back." "Good," she said, and the word was as final and as warm as anything he'd ever heard. Fleur had a specific way of working when she was managing something she was furious about. She got very precise. Every movement economical, every word exact, the fury compressing itself into the mechanical efficiency of someone who has converted emotion into fuel and is burning it cleanly. Harry found her in the library that afternoon and she had 3 open texts, a roll of parchment covered in dense notes, and the expression of someone who had been working for several hours and intended to work for several more. "Your mother filed with the ICW," he said, sitting across from her. "I know. I drafted the brief." She didn't look up. "The French challenge is more complex. Malfoy's intermediary used the Loi de protection de liens ancestraux, a 19th-century French statute that allows challenges to ancestral ward maintenance on child welfare grounds." She turned a page with a controlled sharpness. "It was designed to protect children in families where the ward magic was being weaponized against them. He's using it in the opposite direction." "Clever," Harry said. "Infuriating," Fleur said. "But yes. Clever." She did look up then, briefly, with the full focus look. "Are you all right?" "Fine. I mean about the statement. My mother told me you gave a full account." He met her eyes. "I'm fine about the statement. It's information that's useful and I'd rather it be out in the appropriate context than held privately." She held his gaze for a moment. The gray eyes were doing something complex. "You are extraordinarily matter-of-fact about things that would break most people," she said. Not admiringly, observationally, with a specific undertone of something that wasn't quite worry. "They didn't break me when they happened," he said. "They're not going to break me now." "I know." She looked down at her notes. I'm not concerned about your ability to handle it. I'm concerned about whether you've ever had space to be not fine about it." The observation sat between them with the specific, slightly inconvenient accuracy of things said by people who know you well. "I'll add it to the list," he said. "We have a list now?" "Things to deal with after the tournament," he said. "It's getting long." She looked at him, and the corner of her mouth moved. "I have a list too," she said. "I expect they overlap." "I expect they do." She held his eyes for a moment and then returned to her work, and he opened his own text, and they worked in the warm, familiar parallel silence that had been there since October, which was the most reliable and uncomplicated part of everything the last 8 months had been. After a while she said, without looking up, "The French challenge, I've found the counter-statute. There's a provision in the 1923 International Ward Protocols that explicitly protects bonds formed through accidental activation of ancestral stones. The provision was added after a German case, a Kelpie ward stone in Bavaria, and it's never been successfully challenged. Can you make it work for us?" "I've already written the response." She slid a parchment across the table. "Tell me what you think." He read it. It was 12 pages of the most efficient, precise legal argument he'd ever read, which was a limited sample given he was 14, but he'd read Hermione's arguments and Apolline's briefs and he had a reasonable calibration. It identified the applicable statutes, addressed the child welfare argument directly and turned it on its head, demonstrating that the bond had a documented history of providing protective emotional anchoring for Gabrielle and constituted a net benefit to her welfare, and closed with a request for the challenge to be dismissed with costs. "It's perfect," he said. She looked up. Evaluated whether he was performing approval or expressing assessment. Decided he was doing the latter. "There are 3 French legal scholars whose endorsement would strengthen it significantly," she said. "My mother is contacting them today." She paused. "We'll win the French challenge. The British inquiry is the harder front. Delayed by the ICW filing. Delayed, not eliminated." She tapped her quill against the table, the thinking motion. "Lucius will find another mechanism. He always does, that's what makes him dangerous. Not any single attack but the consistency of pressure. She looked at him. After the tournament, when things escalate, they'll escalate significantly, Harry agreed. I know. I've been reading. She held his gaze. The Dark Lord. The Restoration Ritual. She said it the same way she said everything, directly, without the flinching quality most people brought to it. My mother explained what she believes is being planned. She told you. She tells me everything. Fleur was quiet for a moment. Harry. The way she said his name, she'd started doing it recently, using his name in a specific way when she was about to say something that was going to be the real version rather than the managed version of a thought. I know what you're planning to do, she said. I know you're going to let the portkey take you. That you've been planning for it. She held his eyes. And I know I'm not going to talk you out of it. No, he said. I'm not asking to. She held his gaze. I'm asking you to understand what it will do to the bond if the worst, she stopped. I can feel your heartbeat through the bond when we're this close. Have you noticed that? He had. He'd noticed it recently, the deepening of the bond with proximity, the way it carried more information than it had at distance. Yes, he said. Then you understand that what you're planning is not, it does not only affect you. She held her chin up, the way she held it when she was saying something that cost her something. It affects me. And Gabrielle. And my mother. A pause. I am not asking you not to go. I am asking you to go understanding that. I understand that, he said. I've understood that for months. It's why I've prepared as thoroughly as I have. He held her gaze. I'm not walking into it carelessly. I'm walking into it as prepared as I can possibly be, and I'm walking out of it. She looked at him for a long moment. The bond, she said. She stopped, and something in her face shifted, the door opening. When you're frightened. Or in pain. I feel it. I've felt it all year and it's difficult. To feel those things and not be able to act. I know, he said quietly. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. She shook her head briefly. I'm not telling you to apologize. I'm telling you because you should know that when you're out there, you are not alone in it. Even at distance. She paused. Even in the dark. The library settled around them, the fire crackling, the last of the evening light going amber through the windows. The bond, Harry said. The full version. What your mother calls the complete soul-tier bond. She said it deepens with time and proximity. Yes. It's going to complete at some point. The full bond, not just the baseline. She was very still for a moment. Yes. When that happens, what does it feel like? She looked at him for a long, steady moment. I don't know, she said. My mother doesn't know precisely. There are almost no documented soul-tier completions and the accounts that exist are, she paused. My mother's description was, like recognizing yourself in someone else's face. Harry sat with that. I like that description, he said. Something in her expression shifted, not the managed shift, the real one, the door-opening one. So do I, she said softly. Lucius moved on the 5th of June. Not legally this time. The ICW filing had blocked the British Channel efficiently enough that a new legal approach would take longer to construct than he apparently had patience for. He moved socially instead. The story appeared in the Daily Prophet on the morning of the 5th, a full page, below the tournament coverage, with the headline, Delacour family's mysterious interest in Harry Potter, Veela manipulation or something darker? It was the work of Rita Skeeter, which Harry had been expecting in the same way you expect weather. You don't know the specific day but you know the season, and this was absolutely the season. The article was constructed with Skeeter-specific, infuriating skill, not false, exactly, but assembled from true fragments arranged to suggest things the fragments didn't actually say. It noted the Ward-Stone bond without explaining its nature, quoted anonymous sources suggesting Apolline Delacour had long-standing influence over Harry Potter, used the word Veela in the specific way that activated all the existing cultural prejudices around it, and ended with a paragraph suggesting that Fleur Delacour's selection as Beauxbatons champion might warrant additional scrutiny, given the family's unexplained connection to a Hogwarts student. Hermione read it at breakfast with the controlled fury of someone who had been waiting for exactly this attack vector. "He can't win legally, so he's going for character," she said. "Make Apolline seem manipulative, make Fleur's selection seem questionable, make the bond seem sinister. Skeeter has a source inside Hogwarts," Harry said. "Obviously. The details about a beetle," Harry said. Hermione looked at him. "She's been getting into places she shouldn't be able to. The Hagrid interview, the first task area, the Beauxbatons quarters." He looked at her steadily. "An animagus. Unregistered. Small enough to go everywhere." Hermione was very still for a moment, the specific stillness of someone whose mind has just assembled a picture and is verifying it. Then she looked at Ron. Ron looked at the table in the specific way people look at things when they're very carefully not reacting to something. "I'll handle Skeeter," Hermione said, with a specific quality that Harry decided not to examine too closely. "Diplomatically," he said. "Comprehensively," she said. He decided to trust the process. The response to the article arrived the same day, which was the part Lucius had not planned for, the assumption that Apolline Delacour would take the weekend to formulate a response, that the narrative would run for at least 2 news cycles, that the social damage would compound. Apolline released a statement at noon. It was 2 pages, co-signed by the French Minister for Magic, the President of the International Confederation of Wizards, and, Harry read this twice, the headmistress of Beauxbatons, Madame Maxime, who had apparently been engaged in this fight without Harry's knowledge and with considerably more political capital than he'd credited her with. The statement addressed every element of the article with the precision of a surgical instrument, provided the full historical and legal context for Ward-Stone bonds, noted that the anonymous sources quoted had provided information that was demonstrably inaccurate in 3 specific technical details, and closed with a line that Harry read 3 times because it was exactly the kind of sentence that looked mild until you understood what it had just done. The Delacour family has no interest in conducting its ancestral affairs through the British press. Any further representations of this nature will be addressed through appropriate legal channels. We note that the specific technical inaccuracies in the article could only have originated from someone who accessed confidential ministry monitoring data, the provenance of which the ICW has already been asked to investigate. She had named the data leak without naming Lucius. She had told everyone who mattered that she knew where the leak came from, without saying it in a way he could litigate. Harry looked at it in the afternoon edition of The Prophet, which had printed it, because even Fudge's Prophet wasn't going to ignore a statement from the French minister, and felt something that was very specifically the sensation of watching someone execute a plan they'd been building for a long time. He went to find Apolline. She was in the Beauxbatons common area, sitting with Fleur and Gabrielle, and the specific atmosphere of the room was the atmosphere of 3 people who have spent an afternoon in the focused, collective work of something that matters to them. Gabrielle had a chess board. Fleur had documents. Apolline had coffee. The statement, Harry said. Was necessary, Apolline said, without looking up from her coffee. The provenance line. He'll know what it means. She looked at him now, steady and certain. He'll spend the next week calculating how much we know and how we know it. That calculation takes his attention. Attention he was directing elsewhere. You're buying time before the 3rd task, Harry said. I'm buying you 2 days of reduced pressure. She looked at him over the coffee cup. Use them. Harry sat. Gabrielle immediately relocated her chess board to the table in front of him with the efficiency of someone who has been waiting for this opportunity. You've gotten better, she told him. But you still protect your queen too early. Your queen is the most valuable piece, Harry said. No, Gabrielle said, with the patient certainty of someone explaining something to a person who keeps missing the obvious thing. The most valuable piece is the one in the right position at the right moment. The queen is only the most valuable piece if you've put her where she can be most valuable. Otherwise she's just big. Fleur, from behind her documents, made a sound that was absolutely a suppressed laugh. Harry looked at the board. Right, he said. Show me. Draco found Harry in the corridor outside Transfiguration on the 6th of June, which was either bad timing or specifically chosen timing, and Harry's read on Draco Malfoy after 4 years was that bad timing and specifically chosen timing produced the same result because Draco was performing something his father had written and hadn't yet developed enough independent judgment to distinguish between the script and the situation. My father, Draco said, falling into step beside Harry in the specific way people fall into step when they want to say something without the vulnerability of stopping to say it, thinks you're being stupid. About what specifically? Harry said. The bond. The Veela nonsense. Draco's voice had the specific register he used when he was repeating something he'd heard rather than formed, which was slightly flatter than his ordinary sneer. You're making everything more complicated than it needs to be. My father could make all of it go away. The inquiry, the French challenge, all of it. He has the connections. Harry walked. He could make it go away, Draco continued, if you were willing to cooperate. On certain things. What things? A pause that was slightly too long. He didn't specify. Right. Harry kept walking. Draco. What? Your father knows I'm not going to cooperate on unspecified things, and he knows I know that cooperate on unspecified things means abandon the bond and step away from the Delacours. He knows I won't do that. So this conversation isn't an offer. He glanced at Draco sideways, briefly. It's reconnaissance. He wants to know where I am emotionally. Whether the legal pressure and the newspaper piece have rattled me. Draco was quiet. Tell him, Harry said, that I'm fine. That I'm not rattled. And tell him I said thank you for the information about the inquiry timeline, knowing his approach helped us prepare the ICW response. Draco stopped walking. Harry didn't. He was 3 corridors away before he heard Draco's footsteps resume in the opposite direction, which meant the message was going back to Lucius, and the message was accurate and would tell Lucius several things he needed to understand before the 3rd task. Specifically, that Harry Potter was not operating alone. That the bond wasn't a weakness to exploit. That whatever Lucius had thought he was managing for 6 years was significantly larger than his model had accounted for. He found Ron and Hermione in the common room. Draco approached me, he said. Fishing, Ron said immediately. Yes. His father's rattled. Harry sat. The ICW filing, the statement, he expected more time. He's recalculating. He looked at them. The 3rd task is tomorrow. After that things move fast. Hermione had her notebook out. I've been thinking about the port key, she said. If it takes you to a ritual site, it does. Then the return port key will be activated by the ritual's conclusion or disrupted by significant magical interference. She looked at him. I've been researching emergency portus charms. The kind used in horror fieldwork. You can attune a personal object as a return port key if you have a fixed anchor point. Harry looked at her. I need the anchor point, she said. A location that's deeply connected to you magically. Something with enough personal resonance to hold the portus charm. She paused. The bond would work. But I can't charm the bond. The ward stone, Harry said. She blinked. Privet Drive. The stone is still there, I buried it but the connection is still active. It's the original anchor point. He held her gaze. Can you attune to it? I can attune to the magical signature I've recorded from your bond residue readings. She was already writing. It's not standard practice. It might not work. Might not, Harry said, is considerably better than definitely not. She worked on it for 3 hours that evening while Harry prepared in other ways, quietly, methodically, in the way he prepared for things, without drama or announcement. He checked his wand. He thought through every scenario he'd built over 6 months, the branching decision tree he'd assembled from what he knew and what he'd inferred and what Apolline had told him. He thought about what it meant to walk into something enormous and walk back out of it. He thought about the people he was walking back to. At 10 that night, he sat in the common room after everyone else had gone to bed, and he reached along the bond, all 3 threads, deliberately, with the full intention of communication rather than just connection. To the large one, the warm gold watchful one, I know you're awake. Thank you for everything. To the growing bright one, I'll be back for chess. To the sharp, warm, blade turn one, I know. He felt them come back, one after another, each with the specific quality he'd learned to read like handwriting. Apolline's, yes. Come back whole. Gabrielle's, which wasn't words but was the specific feeling of a small, determined light burning steady. And Fleur's. Fleur's was different. It came back full and clear and without any management at all, and what it contained was every version of I know that the English language didn't quite have enough room for, the frightened version and the certain version and the version that was both simultaneously, and underneath all of it, burning steady and unmistakable, something she hadn't said with words in any corridor or library or winter evening on the castle wall. But the bond said it. Harry sat in the empty common room with his hand on his chest and the fire burning low and felt it land, clear and certain, the thing at the other end of 6 years of warmth. He was quiet for a long time. Then he went to bed. He slept without difficulty, which was either the sign of extraordinary psychological equilibrium or a complete failure to appreciate the severity of the situation, and he suspected it was both and didn't particularly mind either way. The morning of the 3rd task arrived with the specific, theatrical beauty of a day that has decided to look significant. The grounds were bright and sharp, the summer morning light doing everything light can do on Hogwarts grass, the maze hedges dark and 20 feet tall and rustling with something that wasn't wind. The spectators were filling the scaffolding with the specific noise of a large crowd that has been building towards something for 8 months and has finally arrived. Harry stood at the maze entrance with Cedric to his left and Crumb and Fleur beyond him, and Bagman was talking, and the crowd was a specific kind of loud, and none of it was fully real in the way that things aren't quite real when you're on the close side of something large. He looked at the maze. He looked at the crowd, Ron and Hermione in the Gryffindor section, Hermione's hand tight on Ron's arm. Apolline in the Beauxbatons area, standing rather than sitting, in the specific posture she used when she was ready to move. Gabrielle beside her, small and certain, looking directly at him with those enormous blue eyes. He looked at Fleur. She was 3 feet to his right, in her competition stance, silver-haired and composed, and she was looking at the maze. Then she looked at him, and the full focus look was there, both of them, grey eyes direct and completely unguarded. She said nothing. She didn't need to. He nodded. She nodded. Bagman counted down. Harry walked into the maze. He found the cup in 38 minutes. Not because the maze was easy, it wasn't. The blast-ended scruts were real and the boggart was real and the mist that took away sense of direction and left you spinning in the dark was real, and Harry dealt with each of them with the specific, unhurried efficiency of someone who has a plan and the clarity to execute it and has decided not to be surprised by anything the maze produces. The boggart, he knew what it would be. He'd thought about it. He'd been prepared to see Voldemort, or the graveyard, or Sirius caged, or any number of the things his life had provided as reasonable source material. It was the stone. The ward stone, dark and cold, with no warmth in it. No threads, no pulse, nothing at the other end of the bond at all. Harry looked at it for 2 seconds. Then he said, very clearly, ridiculous. The stone transformed into a fireplace, blazing, warm, with the specific amber light of the sitting room in Chateau Delacour that he'd never actually seen but knew from the bond the way you know places you've been told about well. The boggart collapsed. He kept walking. He found the cup in the center of the maze, sitting on a plinth in a clearing where two paths met, blazing gold in the maze's ambient light. There was no one else in the clearing. Cedric's path had been deliberately rerouted. He could see the evidence of it, the hedge that had moved, the magical displacement, by someone who had made sure the fourth champion arrived first. He stood in front of the cup. He reached into his pocket and closed his fingers around the object Hermione had spent 3 hours on last night, his father's galleon, a specific coin he'd been carrying since second year, attuned to Hermione's Portus modification, anchored to the ward stone. His emergency exit. He picked up the cup. Chapter 6, The Price Already Paid. The world inverted. Not metaphorically, the portkeys pull was a physical thing, hooking somewhere behind his navel and yanking, the maze dissolving into the specific, nauseating rush of portkey travel, the cup burning in his hand, and then the ground arrived and he hit it rolling, which was instinct from a childhood of learning to take falls. He came up in the dark. The graveyard. He knew it before he had full visual confirmation, the cold, the smell of old stone and turned earth, the specific quality of stillness that places have when they've been waiting. Yew trees at the perimeter. A stone angel with its face worn blank. Rows of headstones in the particular disorder of a very old burial ground that has accumulated grief over centuries without anyone stopping to rearrange it. And in the center, a large stone cauldron, already burning, the fire beneath it a dark and specific color that wasn't any color fire was supposed to be. Wormtail was there. And in his arms, a bundle, small, malformed, the specific wrongness of something that had once been a person and was waiting to be again. Harry was on his feet before Wormtail saw him. He drew his wand. He didn't speak. He didn't announce himself or give warning or perform any of the theatrics of magical confrontation that the books in Hogwarts's library seem to consider obligatory. He cast the binding jinx immediately, the full-body one, and Wormtail hit the nearest headstone and stayed there, and the bundle in his arms dropped. Harry crossed to it. It was wrong up close. Everything about it radiated the deep, fundamental wrongness of a thing that existed through sustained violation of every principle that should have prevented it. He looked at it with the controlled attention he gave things that required examination rather than reaction. It was helpless. Temporarily. It would not be helpless for long. He looked at the cauldron. He thought about everything he knew. The ritual required 3 things, the bone of the father, the flesh of the servant, the blood of the enemy. The flesh was Wormtail's to give and the bone was already there. He could see the disturbed earth at the base of the nearest headstone, where something had been taken. The blood was the variable. His blood. Specifically. He had a choice. He could destroy the cauldron. He had the spells for it. Reductor curse at sufficient power would collapse the cauldron's structural integrity and interrupt the ritual. The ritual would fail. Wormtail would be dealt with. The bundle would be, he didn't know exactly, but it would not complete its restoration. He thought about this for approximately 4 seconds. Then he thought about Dumbledore's face in his office, when Harry had told him what was coming. "What do you need?" Dumbledore had asked, and Harry had told him, and what he'd asked for was, "Be ready. When I come back, have everyone you trust positioned and ready, because if Voldemort restores himself tonight, the war starts tonight, and I'd rather start it on our terms. If Harry destroyed the cauldron tonight, Voldemort would try again. Differently. With more preparation. In a location and time that Harry couldn't anticipate. The advantage of tonight was that Harry was here, and Dumbledore was positioned, and the Delacour influence had spent 3 weeks applying pressure to every political and social front that Voldemort's return would require. If it happened tonight, it happened on a field Harry had spent 6 months preparing. He lowered his wand. He pulled the galleon from his pocket, held it loosely, and put it back. Not yet. He crossed to Wormtail and took the silver hand, the magical prosthetic that Wormtail would have used to carry out the ritual, and cast a sticking charm on the other one, immobilizing it against the headstone. Then he waited. He stood in the graveyard in the dark and he let the ritual happen. Not passively. He watched every component with the focused, technical attention of someone building a counter-response in real time. He noted the bone's emergence from the earth, Wormtail struggling against his binding and managing it despite Harry's work because the silver hand was more capable than Harry had accounted for. He noted the exact moment the flesh went in, the exact color shift of the cauldron fire, the exact sound, a specific, resonant sound, not loud, but carrying, when the blood would need to be added. He stepped forward then. Wormtail had a knife. Harry was faster. He got his wrist around Wormtail's before the blade connected, redirected the cut across his own palm rather than his upper arm as originally scripted. The cut was shallower that way, less blood, but sufficient, and let his blood fall into the cauldron on his own terms, in his own time, with his wand in his offhand and 3 backup plans running simultaneously. The cauldron exploded. White light, enormous, the specific white that magic produces when it's doing something fundamental rather than performative, and Harry was already moving, backward, shield charm up, the light breaking around it like water around stone. When it cleared, Voldemort was standing in the cauldron. Not the wizened bundle. Not the half-formed shade that Harry had heard described in fragments of overheard adult conversations for years. A body, reconstituted, tall and pale as something that had been in the dark for a very long time, with the flat red eyes that appeared in Harry's earliest memories like the print of a photograph taken before he was old enough to understand what he was seeing. They looked at each other. Harry had his wand up. "Harry Potter," Voldemort said, and his voice had the quality it always had in Harry's memory, not human in the way that voices that haven't been human for a long time stop being human. It was the voice of someone who had made a decision about what they were willing to discard in the pursuit of permanence, and had discarded too much. "Tom Riddle," Harry said. Voldemort was very still for a moment. Most people didn't say that. Harry knew this from everything he'd ever read or heard about Voldemort. The name was a weapon he used to produce fear, and the specific fear it produced was the fear of the people who had given the name its power over them through their own refusal to use it. Harry had been saying Voldemort's name since he was 11 and the real name since he'd found it in a Hogwarts library at 13, and it had never felt like power. It felt like accuracy. "You are very calm," Voldemort said. "I was expecting you," Harry said. Something shifted in the red eyes. "You knew." "Since October." Harry kept his wand level. "You've had a busy year." Crouch Jr., Lucius's legal attacks, the Portkey, it was quite a production. "I've been watching it come together." "And you chose to be here," Voldemort said. "Interesting." "I chose the terms," Harry said. "Not you." Voldemort tilted his head slightly, and in the specific, calculating quality of that movement Harry saw the thing that made Voldemort genuinely dangerous, not the power, because power was widely available to people who understood how to cultivate it, but the intelligence. The genuine, structural intelligence of someone who had been the most capable person in every room he'd ever occupied and had made the catastrophic error of confusing that capability with invincibility. "The bond," Voldemort said. The pale face shifted into something that was shaped like a smile. "You've complicated my plans considerably." "I know." The Delacour connection. The ICW filings. The political pressure on 3 simultaneous fronts. Lucius has been frustrated. A pause. "He underestimated you." "I told him he would." "He has a tendency to measure people by their bloodline, which is an imprecision that has always limited him." "Is this the part where you offer me something?" Harry said. Voldemort was quiet for a moment. Then, "You are different from what I anticipated. When Dumbledore spoke of you, I don't particularly care what Dumbledore anticipates either," Harry said. "Or what you anticipated. I'm here. I'm looking at you. Let's be accurate about what this is." Another pause, longer. In the graveyard silence, distant sounds, Wormtail still struggling against the headstone, the dark fire of the cauldron guttering. Something in Voldemort's eyes that was not respect but was its functional equivalent in the vocabulary of someone who had long ago decided respect was beneath him. "What do you want, Harry Potter?" Voldemort said. "To see you," Harry said. "Clearly. Without anyone else's interpretation of you in the way." He met the red eyes steadily. "You've been a symbol my entire life. I wanted the actual thing. And now? Now I know what I'm dealing with." He kept his wand up. "Someone who is genuinely extraordinary and has spent decades making extraordinarily bad decisions. Someone who understood power and never understood what power is for." He paused. "Someone who took everything in themselves that was human and discarded it because it seemed like weakness, and created weaknesses so fundamental they can't be shored up." "The prophecy," Voldemort said. "The prophecy is a self-fulfilling description of a situation you created," Harry said. "You chose the person it would apply to when you came to Godric's Hollow. That choice was yours." The red eyes narrowed. "You will die here." "I don't think so," Harry said. And then Dumbledore arrived. Not through a portkey. Not with the dramatic entrance of someone who has been waiting for a cue. He came through the graveyard's western gate with 4 Aurors and the specific, deliberate pace of a man who has been moving through this particular darkness for 30 years and has decided it ends tonight, and the look on his face. Harry had never seen that look on Dumbledore's face, not in 4 years of being assessed and managed and guided by him. It was something beyond strategy. Something older and more personal. Voldemort turned. Harry moved. He pulled the galleon from his pocket and held it, and used the 3 seconds of Voldemort's redirected attention to set up the Portus anchor, Hermione's modification, the ward stone connection, his hand around the coin, and held. What followed was not elegant. Graveyard battles are not elegant. They are loud and dark and full of light that is the wrong color, and the Aurors moved with the practiced efficiency of people who had been waiting for this specific fight for 13 years, and Voldemort was genuinely, terrifyingly powerful in the way that things which have been stripped of everything that isn't power become purely powerful, and Harry spent 4 minutes ducking and countering and using his shield charm harder than he'd ever used it in his life. He put a reducto through the cauldron. He put a stunner into Wormtail that landed better than he expected, dropping the Silver Hand's advantage. He felt the bond, distant and burning, and understood that in the chateau outside Lyon, and in the Beauxbatons quarters at Hogwarts, people who were connected to him were feeling the edges of this, and he had a brief, very specific thought about Gabrielle lying awake in her room feeling the bond stretch, and then he stopped thinking about it because there was a lot of green light coming at him. He dodged the first one. He cast the second counter, not Expelliarmus, which was his instinct and was also slightly suicidal against the full Dark Lord in a graveyard with no audience conventions to maintain. He used the Protego Maxima that Apolline had spent 2 evenings drilling into him in the 4th floor corridor, the French military version of the shield charm that predated the British classification system and operated on principles the Hogwarts curriculum didn't cover. The green light hit it and divided. Voldemort looked at the shield. "Veela magic," he said. "Adjacent," Harry said. An aura hit Voldemort with a binding curse that should have worked and didn't, because Voldemort's magic was too dense for standard bindings to hold, but it bought Dumbledore time, and Dumbledore's magic, full, adult, decades cultivated, hit Voldemort with something that had the specific quality of very old power meeting older resistance, and the graveyard lit up white. Harry pressed the galleon. He felt the portkey catch, Hermione's anchor, the ward stone, the specific pull of something that had been waiting at the other end of a bond since 1988, and then the graveyard inverted and disappeared and the world rushed through him and he hit the Hogwarts grounds and rolled and came up on one knee. It was dawn. Just barely. The sky above Hogwarts was the grey-blue of very early morning, the castle's towers dark against it, the grounds damp and quiet. He was kneeling in the grass 50 yards from the maze entrance. He had a cut on his palm, a bruised rib from something he hadn't fully noticed happening, a burn along his left forearm from a near miss that he also hadn't fully registered in the moment, and the galleon was hot in his hand and slightly bent. He opened his fingers and looked at it. He was alive. He pressed his palm to his chest, the old gesture, the first one, and felt the bond respond, all 3 threads at once, enormous and immediate and carrying everything at once, like all the doors in a house flying open simultaneously, the warmth and the relief and something else, something larger, something that moved through him the way the Ward Stone activation had moved through him at 8 years old, but with none of the unknowing. This was known. He knew exactly what this was. The bond completed. Not with ceremony. Not with light or sound or any of the dramatic apparatus that magical events in stories used to announce themselves. It completed the way things complete when they've been building long enough, with the quiet, final click of something settling into its permanent shape, every component finding its place, the structure that had been assembling itself for 6 years becoming fully itself. Harry knelt in the dawn grass and felt it, Apolline's anchor, strong and steady, the deep gold warmth of someone who had decided 6 years ago to include him and had never once reconsidered, Gabrielle's thread, burning steady and certain as it always was, uncomplicated and warm, and Fleur's thread, which was, he couldn't find a word for it in English. He'd have to ask her if French had one. He sat back on his heels and looked at the castle and felt the completed bond settling in his chest like the last piece of a structure he'd been building in the dark, and thought, there. Fleur found him before anyone else. Not because she'd been watching the maze exit. She'd been in the Beauxbatons quarters because the third task didn't allow families at the maze entrance, which Apolline had accepted with the specific expression she wore when she had decided to comply with a rule she found inadequate. Fleur found him because the bond completed and she knew exactly where he was, the way you know the location of your own heartbeat, not by thinking about it, just by being alive. She came across the grounds in the early morning at something that was technically not quite running but covered ground efficiently, and when she reached him he was still sitting in the wet grass looking at the castle, and she stopped 2 feet away. He looked up at her. She looked down at him. She was in her Beauxbatons robes, silver-haired, and her face was, everything the bond had been carrying in the dark, all of it present and visible, the door completely open. Her eyes were bright and she was absolutely not crying, and the not crying was the most specifically Fleur thing about this moment. "You came back," she said. "I said I would," he said. She sat down in the wet grass beside him. Not with him standing in her beside him or any configuration that wasn't them at exactly the same level, which he noted because Fleur was precise about these things in ways that mattered to her. "The bond completed," she said. "Yes. I felt it." She held his eyes. "I was in my room and I felt everything. Like every door I've ever kept closed opened simultaneously." She paused. "It was extremely inconvenient, because I was asleep." "I'm sorry," he said. "You're not," she said. "I'm not," he agreed. They sat in the dawn quiet for a moment. Somewhere above them, in the castle, Harry could feel the 3 threads, the full, completed versions, warm and permanent, and the sense he'd been waiting for all night, the specific, solid sense of not being alone, was present in a way that made every previous version of it seem like a draft. "What is it like?" he said. "On your end?" She thought about it, which was what she did when she was going to be precise rather than fast. "Like finding out that a piece of music I've been hearing incompletely for years has a 4th instrument," she said finally. "And now I can hear the whole thing, and I understand what it was missing and also why the incomplete version still made sense on its own." She paused. "Does that?" "Yes," he said. "That exactly." She held his gaze, and the gray eyes were steady and warm and entirely, completely direct, the way they were when she had decided to stop managing the impression she made and just be the thing she was. "I love you," she said. Not dramatically. Not with the weight of performance or the setup of a significant moment. With the specific, practical delivery she gave truths that were too solid to need decoration. Harry looked at her. "I know," he said. "I've known for a while." Something moved across her face that was the very particular expression of someone who has said a significant thing and received a response that is simultaneously satisfying and extremely irritating. "And," she said, with the specific tone she used for "I am going to wait you out." "And I love you," he said, with the same plainness she'd used, because it was true in the same uncomplicated way that it was true and didn't require embellishment. "I've known that for a while too." She looked at him. "You are," she said, "constitutionally incapable of doing anything in the conventional way, aren't you?" "Consistently," he agreed. She held his gaze for one more moment, and then she leaned forward and kissed him, and it was nothing like the cheek kiss in December. This was the real version, deliberate and warm, and the bond sang through it like a current through water, and Harry's hand came up to her face without any input from him at all, the way your body goes toward warmth. When she pulled back she looked at him, and she was almost smiling, the full version, the one she gave very rarely. "About time," she said. 6 years, Harry said. "I thought we'd been fairly efficient." She laughed, and he felt it through the bond and in the air simultaneously, and the morning light was coming properly now, and the wet grass was cold under them and neither of them moved. Apolline arrived 7 minutes later. She came across the grounds with Gabrielle at her side and the specific, precise pace of a woman who has been calculating this walk since approximately 2 in the morning and has had sufficient time to compose herself entirely, and who has also perhaps been moving the moment Harry's portkey landed because the bond is quite accurate. Gabrielle detached from Apolline's side at approximately 15 feet and covered the remaining distance in the specific way that 6-year-olds cover distances, without preamble, without slowing, and sat down on Harry's other side and put her arms around as much of him as she could reach and said nothing at all. Harry put his arm around her. She was warm and certain and smelled of sleep and the specific faint Veela quality that he'd never have been able to describe to anyone but which felt, in the completed bond, like home. Apolline stopped in front of him. She looked at him for a long, measured moment with the gold eyes, checking, assessing, the specific thorough look she'd given him since the first morning in the faculty quarters when she'd handed him coffee and decided to be honest. "You're hurt," she said. "Minor," he said. "Your palm. Cut. Shallow." She knelt, which was a gesture he understood was not something Gabrielle Delacour did easily or often, and took his injured hand in both of hers. She said something in French under her breath and the cut warmed briefly and closed, not a standard healing charm, something older, the Veela warmth principle applied to a physical wound, the vérité ardente treating the injury as a falsehood to be corrected. He looked at his palm. She looked at it too. Then she looked at him with an expression that had all the management stripped away, just Apolline Delacour, who had been waiting for 6 years to look at the person at the other end of something she'd understood long before anyone else, and who had decided somewhere around their third corridor conversation to love him with the specific, ferocious commitment she brought to everything she decided mattered. "Whole," she said. Just the one word. What she'd asked for. "Whole," he confirmed. She stood, recollecting herself with the practiced ease of a woman who permits herself exactly one moment of unguarded feeling before returning to competence. "Dumbledore," she said. "In the graveyard with the Aurors." Harry paused. Voldemort was restored. The ritual completed. And Dumbledore was there. And the fight was not brief. He looked at her. "I don't know yet how it resolved. I used the portkey before the end." "You survived," she said. "I chose survival," he said. "Specifically. On my own terms." She looked at him for a moment with the expression she wore when he did something that matched or exceeded her model of him. "Yes," she said. "I know the difference." Fleur was watching them from his other side, and when Harry looked at her she had the expression she wore when something was exactly what it should be. Gabrielle had gone to sleep against Harry's arm, which was the most specific possible demonstration of the bond's quality, that a 6-year-old who had been feeling the edges of a graveyard fight through a metaphysical connection was comfortable enough in his presence to go immediately to sleep. He looked at the castle. The morning was properly arrived now, the light warm and unambiguous, and there were already figures moving on the grounds, officials, probably, tournament marshals, eventually the crowd that had been waiting at the maze for a winner who hadn't come out through the conventional exit. There would be chaos. He knew that. There would be fudge and the ministry's reflexive denial and the specific, institutional panic of a government that had been telling itself for 13 years that the worst thing that had ever happened was definitely over. There would be questions and press and the long, grinding work of what came next. There would be Lucius Malfoy, recalculating in some manner somewhere, understanding now that all his architecture was inadequate. There would be Voldemort, restored and real, with the specific, unfinished quality of something that had been interrupted before its conclusion. Harry looked at all of this, arranged in his head like pieces on a board, and felt, not calm exactly, but something more durable than calm. The specific quality of someone who has looked at the full scope of a problem and decided it's solvable. What now? Fleur said. He thought about it. Now, he said, I need a shower. Then breakfast, because I haven't eaten since yesterday. Then a conversation with Dumbledore when he gets back. He paused. Then whatever comes next. The inquiry is still pending, Apolline said. Delayed, not dismissed. We deal with it. Lucius will move again. Differently. He's resourceful. We deal with that too. He looked at her. You taught me three-front strategy. We apply it. Apolline looked at him with the look that was past approval, past assessment, the look that was simply the settled certainty of someone who has been right about something important and is living in the world where that rightness has been confirmed. Yes, she said. We do. Dumbledore found Harry in the hospital wing. Not because Harry was admitted, Madame Pomfrey had tried, with the tired persistence of someone who has been having this specific conversation since 1991, and Harry had submitted to a diagnostic assessment and accepted the wound heal potion and drawn the line at an overnight stay on the grounds that there was too much happening and he was functionally fine. Dumbledore came in while Madame Pomfrey was dressing the burn on Harry's forearm, and he sat in the chair at the bedside and he looked at Harry with the look that Harry had never seen before last night in his office, the unmanaged one, the one that wasn't the headmaster or the chess player or the man with the long view, just an old man who had been carrying a war for a very long time. It's done, Dumbledore said. Not finished. But done for now. Voldemort? He departed when it became clear the tactical situation was unfavorable. He is restored. He is corporeal. He is not in custody. He paused. Wormtail is. Harry absorbed this. Crouch Jr. Already dealt with. Before I came here. Dumbledore's voice was even, but something underneath it was not. I owe you an apology, Harry. Harry looked at him. I knew something was wrong with Moody within the first month of term, Dumbledore said. I suspected polyjuice. I monitored, I gathered evidence, I managed the situation, as I am accustomed to managing situations, with patience and careful observation. He held Harry's gaze. I did not consider that my patience was using you as a resource. That the tournament's danger was a cost I was calculating against an intelligence advantage. He paused. You knew all of this and came to me anyway. Told me anyway. Gave me everything I needed to be positioned correctly. A very long pause. I am not accustomed to being the person who needed positioning. You positioned yourself correctly when it mattered, Harry said. Because you placed the information in my hands. Dumbledore looked at him steadily. I have been managing you, Harry. Since you came to Hogwarts. I have made decisions about what you should know and when, based on what I believed you could handle and what served the larger situation. I am aware that this has been inadequate. He paused. I am aware that you have been making better decisions than I would have given you the information to make, and that most of those better decisions happened because you found other sources. Harry thought about Apolline. About the fourth-floor corridor and the coffee and the 17-page ICW brief and the Protego Maxima drilling and the conversation in which she'd said, "I'm not here to protect you," with the deliberate precision of a woman who understood the difference between protection and solidarity. "I have good sources," he said. "The Delacour family." Dumbledore's voice was measured. "Apolline Delacour is," he paused. "She is formidable. More formidable than I was prepared for." He looked at Harry with something that might have been rueful. "She wrote me a letter in October. Did you know that?" Harry didn't know that. "She informed me that she was aware of the situation with Moody, that she had already taken certain precautions on your behalf, and that she would appreciate it if I refrained from managing her family's relationship with you through institutional channels." He paused. "She was extremely courteous about it." "She's always extremely courteous when she's telling you she's already done the thing herself," Harry said. "Yes," Dumbledore said, and the look on his face was the closest to genuine amusement Harry had seen from him all year. "That is exactly accurate." They sat for a moment. "What next?" Harry said. "The Ministry will deny," Dumbledore said. "Fudge has too much invested in the comfortable version of events to accept the accurate one readily. There will be institutional resistance that will last some time. I intend to spend that time building the structures that will be necessary when the denial can no longer be maintained." He looked at Harry. "I need to do this differently than I've done things before. I would like, if you're willing, to do some of it in actual consultation with you." Harry looked at him. He thought about everything he'd learned in a year about what consultation actually meant. About the difference between being briefed and being trusted, between being managed toward a conclusion and being brought to the table. "I'm willing," he said. "If it's actually consultation and not a different kind of management." Dumbledore held his gaze, and the old blue eyes were completely honest in a way they hadn't always been. "Agreed," he said. They shook hands. It was, Harry thought, the first time that specific gesture had felt like it meant what it was supposed to mean. The last conversation happened at dusk. Not planned. Not arranged. It happened the way the best conversations happen, because both people were in the same place at the right time and the time was clearly right and there was nothing left to manage around it. Harry was on the wall. The low wall on the castle's eastern face, the one where he and Fleur had sat in December while the mountain wind came off the hills, and he was watching the evening settle over the grounds with the specific, quiet attention he gave things when he was processing rather than thinking. The tournament was over. The year was over. There was a great deal coming. He was aware of all of it. He had, at this precise moment, very deliberately, no plan. He heard her coming, not the footsteps, the bond, the specific quality of the sharp thread that he could feel like weather now, the direction and intensity of it. Fleur sat beside him. They watched the evening for a moment. "Gabrielle is asleep," she said. "She was awake all night." "The bond, I know. She'll be fine." Fleur paused. "She told me to tell you that you owe her 3 chess games, because she's been too worried to practice." "I accept the debt," Harry said. "She also told me that she knew you'd come back because you feel like a fireplace and fireplaces don't go out." Harry looked at his hands for a moment. That is genuinely the best thing anyone has ever said about me," he said. Fleur smiled. "The full one. The one that transformed everything about her face into the real version of itself." They sat for a while in the comfortable silence, the kind of silence they'd built in libraries and corridors over 8 months, which had its own quality now, the completed bond making it fuller, richer, the parallel silence of two people whose connection had found its permanent shape. "What are you thinking?" she said. "That 6 years ago I was 8 years old and bleeding in a garden and I accidentally activated a ward stone, and that was the best accident of my life." He looked at her. "And that I spent a long time after that being grateful for the warmth without understanding what the warmth was. And now I do." She held his gaze. "And the rest?" she said. Voldemort. The war that's coming. We deal with it, he said. The same way we've dealt with everything this year. 3 fronts. As many fronts as it takes. He looked at her steadily. Together. She held his gaze for a long moment, and in the gray eyes was everything the Bond had been saying since October without language, the certainty of it, the thing she'd chosen rather than been compelled to, the thing that was real in the way that only chosen things are fully real. Tell me something, she said. When you were in the graveyard. When things were, when the green light was coming at you. She held his eyes. What did you think about? He was quiet for a moment. Gabrielle's chess, he said. Your laugh in the library. Your mother handing me coffee at 7 in the morning like it was the most natural thing in the world. He paused. The stone in the garden. What it felt like when it answered back. She was very still. The warmth, she said softly. Always, he said. Since the beginning. All of it. She reached out and took his hand, not dramatically, not with the weight of ceremony, just the simple, decisive movement of someone taking what belongs to them and what they belong to, and laced her fingers through his. He looked at their hands. Looked at the evening. Felt the bond, complete and permanent, all 3 threads burning steady in his chest, Apolline's deep gold warmth, Gabrielle's bright certainty, and Fleur's, which was the one he could feel like his own heartbeat. He was 14 years old. He had a war coming. He had a ministry that was going to spend the next year pretending the war wasn't coming. He had Lucius Malfoy, somewhere, recalculating. He had Voldemort, restored and real, with the unfinished quality of a problem deferred rather than solved. He had all of this, and he was looking at it with the clear-eyed, unflinching attention of someone who had decided a long time ago that the size of the problem wasn't a reason to stop working on the problem. But he also had 3 threads burning in his chest. He also had a family that had decided, 6 years ago in the small hours of a February morning, that the person at the other end of something extraordinary was worth knowing. Worth including. Worth showing up for in corridors at 7 in the morning with coffee and accurate information and the specific, ferocious love that people give when they choose rather than being asked. He had the price already paid. 8 years old, alone in a winter garden, bleeding onto something old and not knowing what he'd started. He had no idea what he'd started. Now he did. He squeezed Fleur's hand. She squeezed back. The evening went gold over the grounds, and the black lake went dark, and somewhere in the castle Apolline Delacour sat with her youngest daughter asleep in her arms and felt, through the completed bond, the specific warmth of someone who was exactly where they were supposed to be. And in a garden in Surrey, beneath the precise, regulation height grass of No. 4, Privet Drive, a very old stone sat in the dark. Dormant. Finished. Its purpose fulfilled in a February night in 1988 and its consequences still unfolding in all the ways that consequences do, outward, branching, warm. The price had been paid in blood and cold and 6 years of darkness. What had been bought was worth considerably more.